A long time ago there lived a famous blacksmith there. He sold handmade weapons and armor, and one day he had the fortune of negotiating directly with the kingdom of Cairo. In the middle of a war that seemed to have no end, it was an incredible opportunity to increase his prestige. After the war, the blacksmith was rewarded with the title of Baron and became the owner of that land. The old man telling the story explained that the blacksmith was the father of Master Roman. While listening, someone might wonder why he was hearing a story that everyone already knew. But a few hours earlier, Roman himself had sought out that man to learn more details. He confirmed that he was the eldest son of the Dimitri family and that the place belonged to the kingdom of Cairo, located on the continent of Salamandra. The man replied that it was true and found it strange to see the young man like that, since he had never been known for being very intelligent and lately had been far too popular among the young nobles, always involved with drinking and drugs. The servant warned that on that day his fiancée, the lady of the Lawrence family, would be visiting him. It was important because unlike his brothers, Master Roman had spent the last 25 years locked in his room, being called by everyone the idiot of the Dimitri family. The lady valued elegance and good manners, so preparing himself was crucial. Even so, Roman said he had something much more important to resolve and asked them to bring him the oldest person in that land. For him, that visit was less important than understanding how to live in that world. The servant was shocked by that sudden change, since the young master had always lived uselessly, but decided to follow the order because it was his duty. That was how they returned to the present moment, with Roman listening to the story of the old man, who finished by saying that was everything he knew. Roman thanked him and said he would reward him. At that moment, he thought that now he was Roman Dimitri, but he was normally called Baek Jung Hyuk. In the world of Murim, he had lived as the leader of the heavenly demon sect, had lived a fierce life, and after accomplishing everything he wanted, he accepted death calmly. For some reason, however, he awakened in the body of Roman Dimitri. He did not know if that was the will of heaven or a divine punishment. While reflecting on that, he was in the poorest district of the region. A boy was being beaten in the middle of the street, trampled in front of everyone. Several men were attacking him in a cowardly way. Roman's servant named Hans recognized the fang tattoo on the arm of the first man and realized they were the Bloodfangs, a criminal group that operated not only in the Dimitri territory but also in nearby regions. The boy was probably in debt to them. Hans whispered that it was better for them to leave because that group was cruel, but when he realized it, Roman was already approaching and telling them to stop. The bald leader mocked him, asking if he was feeling important just for being a noble, and told him to leave, saying that it was Bloodfang business. Hans insisted that they should leave, but Roman said he still did not know the laws of that place very well, and asked him to explain who had broken the law and what punishment would be appropriate. After calming down, Hans explained that the boy was wrong for not paying the debt, but the Bloodfangs had no authority to judge him. He should be taken to court. Besides that, disrespecting the eldest son of the Dimitri family was a crime that, according to the law of the country, could cost someone their life. Then Roman picked up a branch from the ground and declared that they had broken the law of that land. As the eldest son of Lord Romero Dimitri, he himself would apply the punishment. The bald man tried to argue that he did not understand how the world worked and that he was putting everyone in a difficult situation, especially after recognizing the tattoos. Roman answered that was enough. They were trash for speaking that way to the owner of the land. When he advanced, everyone was surprised by his speed. Using only a branch, he pierced the bald man's throat. The others, instead of running away, attacked with knives and blades, but Roman easily dodged and with the same branch pierced the stomach of another man. While fighting, he remembered what he had seen when he first opened his eyes in that world. A testament written by Roman Dimitri and several drugs scattered on the floor. The kingdom of Cairo, always at war, required each family to send a representative to the army. Roman Dimitri had been chosen to represent the Dimitri family, but he gave up out of fear. He knew that had been a pathetic life, but now the owner of that body was Baek Jung Hyuk, the leader of the heavenly demon sect, and he would live in his own way. In a few seconds, all the Bloodfang criminals were dead. Only one last man remained, who did not have the courage to fight and tried to run away. But Roman forced the last man to his knees and explained that for a group to live in order, the law must be followed. He said he would not take his life, but he would still have to pay for what he had done. Then he tore out the criminal's eyes, and in front of everyone who was watching introduced himself as the eldest son of the Dimitri family. He declared that if anyone was dissatisfied with the punishment, they could come find him at any time. In the world of Murim, he was Baek Jung Hyuk, a man who had reached the peak and commanded the heavenly demon sect. Hundreds of thousands of martial artists challenged him and were massacred. When their blood formed a river, the entire world recognized the dominance of the sect. And now, in that body of Roman, he found it almost ridiculous that he had needed to make an effort just to deal with a few rats. After that, he asked Hans to call the guards and report everything that had happened. Hans replied, "Yes, sir," and ran off. Alone, Roman analyzed his own body and realized how weak it was, with a terrible flow of energy and almost no physical conditioning. He knew he needed to gather information quickly and begin training. The boy who had been beaten approached and thanked him for saving him. Roman made it clear that he had not done it out of kindness. The Bloodfangs had broken the law and were punished for it, but the boy would also have to pay his own debt. The boy explained that his parents had borrowed money from the group to buy land and cultivate it. They would have been able to pay easily after the harvest, but the criminals destroyed the plantation to prevent the payment. On top of that, they were after his younger sister, which he considered unfair, since they had never harmed anyone. Desperate, he begged that at least his sister be protected. Roman observed the firm look in the boy's eyes and felt something different. He remembered having met another man called the Mad Demon in a degraded place like that. He asked the boy's name, and the boy answered that his his name was Kevin. Roman said he would verify if everything was true, and that he would resolve what had happened. Kevin thanked him deeply. Deep down, Roman had the feeling that that encounter was not by chance, and that he would have a long connection with that boy. Meanwhile, Lady Flora was in a carriage on her way to the Dimitri residence. 1 month earlier, she had been shocked to discover that she would have an arranged marriage with that family. Her father explained that their lands were also in a bad situation, and that the union was necessary. Even so, Flora could not easily accept it. She did not want to spend the rest of her life in a family known for minors and constant wars. Her father apologized and said he had been forced to make that decision. Flora thought that at least she could marry the second son who had a promising future, but everything was ruined when the eldest son, Roman Dimitri, demanded to marry her. She knew his reputation, known as the idiot of the Dimitri family, someone who lived only for luxury and pleasure. When they met, Flora said that she would cancel the marriage. To her surprise, Roman replied that for him that was fine. He stated that he had also heard about the engagement, and that he had no interest in marrying someone like her. He said it would be better to cancel it completely. Flora became confused, not knowing if he was speaking seriously. He added that he would inform his father immediately, but she interrupted him, asking if he really wanted to get married. Roman answered with another question, asking if she wanted to marry him. She admitted that she did not. Then he concluded that there was no reason for them to create problems for each other. Both agreed to cancel the engagement, and Roman took full responsibility for the decision, saying that for him it was not a big deal. Flora left that meeting wondering if that man was really the same one from the rumors. Later, when Roman told her father, he became furious. He said that even though Roman was called an idiot, he had always tried to offer the best as a father. A marriage with the Lawrence family was the best chance for the Dimitri family to consolidate their position as nobles. All Roman had needed to do was marry a beautiful noblewoman and fulfill his role, but Roman only apologized. The father, irritated, threw a stamp at him and stated that if the plan had worked, he might have been able to do something to avoid his conscription. Now he would be sent to the battlefield in 6 months. Roman did not argue. The father also commented that he had heard about the incident with the Bloodfangs. Witnesses said that he punished the criminals, but he simply did not believe it. Roman's father, the Baron Romero Dimitri, explained that the real problem was that the Bloodfangs were a group far too powerful, something that even he could not control easily. He said that the moment Roman failed to fulfill his duty as a son, he ended up creating serious problems for the family. Therefore, he would receive no help at all. If he wanted to confront the Bloodfangs, he would have to deal with the consequences alone. The Baron believed that his son would beg for mercy, but Roman simply replied that it was fine. He said the problem had been caused by his own actions, and that he would take full responsibility. Romero fell silent in shock as he watched his son leave and close the door without hesitation. Outside, Flora asked if he had gone mad. Roman, wiping the blood from the blow he had received from his father, asked why she was still there. She questioned whether he had really gotten involved with the Bloodfangs, reminding him that the group was not afraid even of nobles, and that if they felt provoked, they would do everything they could to take revenge. She suggested that he should go and beg the Baron for mercy. Roman asked why he should do that, and said that Flora clearly did not know her own place. Later, while getting ready, he commented to Hans that the perfume was terrible. Hans explained that there was not much that could be done since the smell of blood had soaked into the clothes. Roman also complained that the clothes were too tight, and Hans reminded him that it was his first meeting with his fiancée, and that he should show respect. Hearing that, Roman reflected that he was still getting used to that world, and that a marriage would only increase his burden unnecessarily. He needed to break the engagement as soon as possible, while offending Flora as little as possible. But when the moment arrived, he realized that Flora had never intended to show him any respect. That gave him even less reason to act with consideration. When he declared that he would take full responsibility for breaking the engagement, he noticed that she became anxious. From the moment they decided to cancel the engagement, neither of them had the right to interfere in the life of the other. They would follow separate paths, and each would take care of their own affairs. As he walked through the corridor, Roman thought that taking responsibility was the best way to avoid further conversations about marriage, and also to end any connection with that woman. For him, it would be the last time they met. That night in his chambers, the Baron Romero drank more than he should. Speaking with his wife Lihanna, he admitted that he had used violence against Roman in the past, when they were still commoners, and that he used to beat him frequently. After they became nobles, he promised himself that he would not make his son go through that again. Lihanna said that all their children had grown up healthy, but Romero asked specifically about Roman, remembering that he was the only one who had suffered directly during the difficult times. Lihanna asked him not to blame himself so much. Maybe he had failed in some aspects as a father, but they could still fix that. The Romero she knew would not allow his own son to lose his way. Roman had always been proud, and had probably spoken about confronting the Bloodfangs in the heat of the moment. Even so, no one knew what might happen. Convinced by his wife's words, Romero decided to act, and ordered that Captain Jonathan be called immediately. The next morning, Roman left the residence as if nothing had happened. Hans warned him that it was dangerous to walk around like that because the Bloodfangs could seek revenge at any moment. Roman asked when the group had gained so much power and answered that it was thanks to the infamy built by mercilessly massacring their enemies. In the world of Murim, he knew that infamy generates fear, and fear increases efficiency in carrying out actions. Hans insisted that they were still dangerous. Roman agreed as long as they could make him feel fear, which was not the case. Later, already inside a restaurant, he remained calm. He ordered good food for Hans, and said he could stay there and eat while he went for a walk. Hans became worried and said he could not allow the young master to go out alone. Roman explained that he needed to continue the investigation, and that it would be better for Hans to to remain there for safety. Hans replied that his duty was to protect the young master. Roman asked if he truly considered himself one of his men, and Hans confirmed firmly. Then Roman said that if that was the case, he should help him in the best way possible. He had already done more than enough by accompanying him there. Now he could stay, eat calmly, and wait. Roman would return soon. Hans stood there completely shocked. He had never imagined that the young master would speak to him like that, much less treat him as someone trustworthy. But instead of staying in the restaurant eating as Roman had asked, he went straight to inform his parents about what was happening. Meanwhile, walking alone through the streets, Roman analyzed everything he had discovered about the Bloodfangs. Their individual strength was nothing impressive. The problem was the way they operated. They worked in small scattered groups, always acting discreetly, which made them difficult to hunt. They lived off infamy and the fear they spread. They had no fixed face, and were an authority without a figure. And if he could not find them easily, then he only needed to make them come to him. That was why he was walking through the city without any protection on purpose. When he entered a dark alley, he got exactly what he wanted. He was attacked by members of the Bloodfangs. Meanwhile, Hans ran toward the castle and warned Captain Jonathan that the young master was in danger and needed to be found immediately. But in reality, the ones in danger were the criminals themselves. The first man who advanced was counterattacked and disarmed. The moment Roman took the knife, he killed the man in a second. When the first one had his throat cut, the other two were shocked. Roman simply provoked them, telling them to come and get him. Was that not what they wanted? To kill him? At the castle, Jonathan gathered his soldiers. After hearing everything from Hans, he said it made no sense at all. Even so, Hans asked why he would lie. There was no time to waste. Jonathan remembered the conversation he had with Baron Romero, who had asked him to solve any problem involving his son. Grumbling, he ordered the soldiers to arm themselves immediately and told Hans to guide them. Deep down, he thought that if it was true, the boy had finally dug his own grave. Back in the alley, the hooded men were terrified. Roman, with the blood-stained knife, kept advancing. When they felt pressured, they tried to react, but were defeated easily. He left only one alive and asked if there were only those three. The man threatened that if he killed them, there would be consequences. Roman questioned how he could say that after he had already killed two. He asked whether he truly had no fear, or if he was simply trying to survive. He stabbed the criminal's leg with the knife as a warning, and demanded to know who the leader was. Sometime later, in a busy tavern, the presence of young Master Roman surprised everyone. They asked what he was doing there all of a sudden. He asked the tavern keeper for a drink called Dawn's Tear from the 20s. The man replied that he had nothing with that name and offered something else. Roman said he wanted something strong because he needed to be a little drunk for what he would do in the morning. He remembered the words of the bald man he had interrogated. The code to receive orders from the Bloodfangs was to ask for Dawn's Tear, something strong to do, something in the morning. That tavern was the contact point. Before the tavern keeper could pull the knife hidden under the counter, Roman had already landed a punch directly on his face. The other criminals in the bar attacked at the same time, but were knocked down one after another. The Bloodfangs were incredulous when they saw that the young master had defeated 3 men in an instant. In a short time, the heavenly demon had already strengthened Roman's body with martial arts. He was still far from the peak he had in the world of Murim, but it was more than enough against people like them. When the tavern keeper finally regained consciousness, he asked what was happening. Roman replied that it was good that he had woken up, because they were about to finish. He said the man had attacked him first, and that now only the 2 of them remained. There was something he wanted to know, so they would have a conversation. At that moment, Captain Jonathan arrived with his soldiers and asked what the hell had happened in that bar. One of the knights reported that there was a survivor on the 2nd floor. The man, still trembling, said that it was the young master who had done all of that, and that he had already left for Lawrence. Jonathan asked why Lawrence, and the soldier explained that the man said the main base of the Bloodfangs was there. An hour earlier, Roman had been torturing the tavern keeper to get that information. At first, even while being tortured, the tavern keeper resisted quite a lot. Roman noticed this and made it clear that he actually liked that kind of reaction, because those who do not open their mouths right away, even after going through so many tortures, usually do not fear death and tend to hold the most valuable information. Because of that, he decided to continue. The tavern keeper insisted that it was a waste of time and that they would get nothing from him. Then Roman decided to test something different. He said that if he really was not going to open his mouth, then it did not matter what happened from that point on. He took a photo and mentioned the child in it, asking if it was his son. The tavern keeper denied it immediately and said he did not know what he was talking about, but Roman commented that the child looked too much like him. The man became furious, calling Roman a bastard for being a noble who resorted to threatening family. But for Roman, that was something far too common in the real world. He explained that he had recently learned something interesting about the Bloodfangs. Many of them would sacrifice even their own lives for revenge, but what truly stood out was that all of them had a great debt to the organization. They were not originally bad people, but they had ended up turning into demons because of them. The Bloodfangs did not hesitate to commit crimes to place someone in debt, and afterward they easily turned the debtor's family into slaves. They pushed a person to the edge of a cliff and kept their relatives as hostages. Roman asked if that did not sound like a reasonable hypothesis. The tavern keeper replied that knowing or not knowing the truth would change nothing. Roman then told him to think more carefully and to be careful about where he was betting his own fate. He spoke seriously about killing his family. He swore in the name of the Dmitri family that he would send soldiers to search for his son and that he would kill him. Even so, he said he would give him one more chance. The tavern keeper needed to decide whether he preferred to continue protecting the Bloodfangs and let his son die, or give the information necessary for them to be properly eliminated. Meanwhile, the leader of the Bloodfangs was receiving the news about what had happened. One of his subordinates reported that the entire division had been defeated by Roman Dmitri himself. The leader refused to believe it. He did not think Roman Dmitri was capable of something like that. He knew the boy had the intention of strengthening his own status by eliminating enemies, but an entire division defeated alone by someone rejected by the Royal Academy sounded far too ridiculous. He asked where Roman was now, and was informed that he had just left the region after obtaining information about the Dawn Dew. The older leader commented that they were underestimating that boy. He had attacked the headquarters alone. He ordered that their forces be gathered immediately. They needed to kill Roman before he made contact with the Dmitri Knights. That brat had to be eliminated. He wondered how that damned boy had managed to do all of that, but decided that he would kill him without mercy. At the same time, the news in the Lawrence territory was not encouraging either. The head of the family stated that war was inevitable at that point. He had never imagined something like that when he received the documents from the Barco family. One of the nobles commented that he had never thought the central government would side with the Barco family. Another said they needed to hold the territory at any cost because the Lawrence family was only alive thanks to the fertile land they possessed. The discussion became heated, but the family head made it clear that no matter what happened, they would not give up the territory. If that happened, families from all sides would come after them like hyenas. Since the Barco family did not seem interested in an agreement, the only option left was to resist with everything they had. That was why they had arranged a marriage with the Dmitri family. The idea excited some of them because although the Dmitri family had been commoners in the past, they were now one of the richest families in the region. One of the nobles commented that no matter how much the Barco family had borrowed, they would never be richer than the Dmitri family. The leader replied that he hoped so, and that was why he had sent his only daughter to that idiot. Another noble said that it had been for the good of Lonus, and that he had made the right choice as lord. Outside, Flora listened to everything through the door. She wondered what she should say to them. She had broken the engagement, and could no longer even look at her father's face. Even so, she decided she would not go back on her decision. That was her life, and she would not be sold to a man like that. When Flora finally gathered the courage to tell her father that she would not marry that man, a knight hurried past her announcing that it was an emergency. At the same time, at the gates of the Lawrence territory, Captain Jonathan demanded that they open immediately, claiming that young Master Roman was in danger, and that if anything happened to him, no one there would be forgiven. The guard replied that he could not open the gates, but suddenly news arrived that the Lawrence Square had become complete chaos. In the square, Roman was dragging a man completely covered in blood across the ground. The criminal begged for his life while being pulled in front of everyone. For the old leader of the Bloodfangs, everything had seemed simple at first. He believed he would face only a useless noble, someone easy to kill, and that the reputation of the organization would rise again after that. But when Roman appeared, he defeated everyone in the blink of an eye. At that moment, the old man realized that he would die there. Before that, he was tortured, and then dragged through the public square begging to survive. Roman threw him to the ground right in the middle of the crowd so that everyone could see who he was. The criminal promised he would do anything, that he would become Roman's dog and serve him faithfully if he were spared. Roman replied that he should have thought about that before showing his fangs. Then he stepped on the man's head and announced to everyone that this was the leader of the Bloodfangs, someone whose cruelty everyone knew. The organization had even harmed the Dmitri, using dirty methods to deceive people and attempting to assassinate them. The crimes were clear. Therefore, right there in front of everyone, he would tear the evil out by the root. Without hesitation, he carried out a public execution. Captain Jonathan arrived too late. Soon after, he entered the meeting room of the leader of the Lawrence family to report that they had allowed Roman to enter, but that about an hour later he appeared in the plaza dragging the body of a man. That man was Ben Miles, the leader of the Bloodfangs, and he had been publicly executed by Roman. The news shocked everyone. One of the nobles stated that he had murdered someone inside their territory. Baron Lawrence reflected that this was not the most urgent problem at that moment. He wanted to know if the man who would become his son-in-law had truly eliminated the Bloodfangs. He ordered that Roman Dmitri be summoned immediately so he could hear the story from his own mouth. Later, Roman arrived accompanied by Captain Jonathan and the Dmitri Knights. He formally introduced himself to Baron Lawrence, but the leader went straight to the point and asked why he had committed such a violent act inside Lawrence territory. Roman explained that everything had started days earlier when the Bloodfangs were assaulting an innocent citizen. He executed them on the spot, and realizing that he could not leave them free, went to the main base of the organization and killed the leader. Meanwhile, outside in the corridor, Flora called a knight and asked if the person who had entered was Roman and why he was in her father's office. The knight asked if she still did not know what had happened. Inside the room, Roman finished summarizing the case. The Baron stated that he had no authority to execute someone in that territory. Roman replied that he knew that, but he was skeptical about the ability of the Lawrence family to properly deal with the Bloodfangs. The leader of the organization was not unknown. He was famous for his crimes and had already been released many times. Because of that, Roman decided he could not trust the Lawrence family to resolve that situation. The nobles reacted with outrage, asking how he dared to speak that way. Even Captain Jonathan became tense. Roman admitted that he was disappointed. He believed he would be praised for eliminating the leader of a major criminal group, especially because he had to dirty his own hands with blood to do it. Then he asked the Baron if he had truly done something wrong. Baron Lawrence asked his advisor if he knew Ben Miles. The man replied that he knew he was a criminal, but did not know that he was the leader of the Bloodfangs. The Baron declared that they would not discuss that case any further. He acknowledged that if the territory had taken better care of the situation, none of that would have happened. He said that he would reward Roman later, and that for now he could withdraw. When Baron Lawrence was alone with his advisor, advisor, he began to laugh and said that the boy had surprised him. He declared that Roman would be Flora's husband because it took courage to do something as great as what he had done. The advisor still tried to complain, but the Baron said he did not want to hear excuses. For him, Roman was suitable for Flora. He ordered them to call his daughter immediately to tell her the decision. Later, Roman left to return to Dimitri territory, accompanied by Captain Jonathan. On the way, Jonathan asked if it had really been necessary to insult the Baron in that manner. They might leave unpunished, but it was certain that the Baron would be irritated. Roman replied that the Lawrence family was not taking responsibility for what had happened, and that he had simply made it clear that everything was the result of their negligence. He also commented that the Baron probably still did not know about the cancellation of the marriage, and that he would hardly punish his own daughter's fiancé. Jonathan began to wonder if all of that had been planned. He barely recognized that young man. He did not seem like the Roman Dimitri he had known before, and in fact he was not. In his past life he was Baekjung-hyuk, the son of the heavenly demon. He had been thrown into a pit along with other children, and forced to prove that he had the qualifications to be the true heir. For the heavenly demon, the death of one or even 12 of his children meant nothing. He could simply have more. The only way to prove he was worthy was by ruling that place dominated by strength. Inside that cave, Baekjung-hyuk was beaten by one of the strongest boys, who mocked him, saying that he expected something special because he was the demon's son, but that he was nothing more than a weakling. He tried to fight, but was brutally defeated. While other children were protected by their parents, he had been thrown away into a world where only the strong ruled. When Roman returned home, he took a hot bath because he was exhausted. His body was still weak since awakening in that world. Even so, he had already gone through many situations, almost all involving the Bloodfangs. They had crossed his path, so he eliminated them. He felt no regret. He had not changed who he was inside. He cuts down and tortures those who block his path, and when someone shows the intention to kill him, he uses every possible means to eliminate that threat. That had always been his way of living, and it would not change simply because he had been reborn as Roman Dimitri. Even so, he recognized that it could be dangerous to act that way again. He did not fully understand how that world worked, and his strength was far inferior to what it had once been. While he was thinking about what he should do from then on, Hans appeared and informed him that the Lord was calling for him. In Romero's office, he asked Captain Jonathan if his son had truly done all of that. Jonathan confirmed it, and commented that the young master had changed drastically from one day to the next. The current Roman was not the same person as before. Romero replied that Roman had always been his weak point, the only son who had nothing impressive about him. He was also the only one who had lived with him during the time when he was still a commoner. He remembered when Roman had come to his workplace just to bring him a sweet, saying that his father stayed there working all day and deserved it. Romero had always wanted his son to be happy. Because of that, he favored him and gave him generous allowances, so he would not be ridiculed for being poor. He had never imagined that it would lead him down the wrong path. Part of him had already given up on Roman, but after hearing everything he had done, he began to feel hope again. When Roman entered the office, Romero was prepared for anything, and had decided to correct his own mistakes as a father. He asked directly if he had truly destroyed the Bloodfangs. Roman thought about the father of this new life. He knew that Romero still had great expectations for him. If he told the whole truth, he would be seen in a completely new light, but achievements that far exceed expectations can turn against the one who reveals them too early. If he stepped back now, he would gain time to grow. He was divided between telling the truth or hiding part of it. He remembered when he was being beaten by the boy, until he grabbed a stone, and instead of simply knocking him down, crushed his enemy to death. All the other children were terrified by that brutal display of strength. Jung-hyuk thought that during childhood, while most people were protected by their parents, he had been thrown into a world where only the strong ruled, and he ruled. He showed his superiority. He became the strongest in that place. Because of that, in this life as Roman Dimitri, he decided that he would not hide it. In front of Romero, he admitted that yes, he was the one who killed the Bloodfangs. He did not know how to live while hiding his own superiority. Later, at the training center of the Knights of the Territory, the Lord appeared accompanied by Jonathan and Roman. One of the knights found his presence there strange. Jonathan then announced that they would continue the fencing duels with young Master Roman, and anyone who wished to participate should step forward. Some of them were confused, wondering why they would fight the one they had always called an idiot. An hour earlier, Roman had told his father that he had truly defeated the Bloodfangs. He knew he needed to explain it in a way that would not raise suspicion. He said that he had been secretly training in fencing. Romero asked why he had hidden that, saying he would have supported him if he had known. Roman replied that he had spent a long time wandering alone, and wanted to prove that the idiot of the family could accomplish something as well. The Lord replied that there was no way someone could learn fencing alone well enough to face an entire organization. Then Roman explained that the Bloodfangs had started with illegal loans and sustained themselves through threats and intimidation. He concluded that if he defeated the leader, the group would fall apart. Romero asked if he himself had provoked and captured the leader. Roman confirmed that he had used his own position as bait, since the Bloodfangs usually targeted weaker nobles. Romero said that it had been extremely dangerous, because if they had truly wanted revenge, they could have killed him without thinking twice. Roman replied that he was certain that men pressured by threats and debts would not risk their lives to save a leader to whom they had no loyalty. Hearing this, Romero recognized that his son had demonstrated careful planning, good decision-making, and the courage to carry out the plan. He said that calling it impressive was an understatement. Then he asked for a favor. He wanted to see Roman's fencing with his own eyes to understand how much he had truly changed. At the present moment, he was completely eager to see his own son fight, but no one volunteered to duel against Roman. The boy who had initially thought about stepping forward quickly gave up because it was obvious it was not worth it. If someone defeated Roman, they would receive nothing. If they lost, they still risked being expelled. Jonathan, on the other hand, understood that to completely dominate Roman and maintain the knight's prestige, it needed to be someone truly specialized. He even wanted to step forward himself, but as the captain of the knights, he could not draw his sword against the young master, so he called the warrior Chris, who was precisely the one reflecting on all of that. Chris was the vice captain of the Knights of Dimitri. The first time Chris met Roman had been a year earlier. He had gone out to check a report about a drunk who was disrupting the business of a restaurant. When he arrived, he discovered that the drunk who was fighting and breaking everything was none other than Roman Dimitri, in a deplorable state. He was throwing chairs and bottles at the owner of the establishment. That day, Chris tried to end the situation and take the young master away, but Roman reacted aggressively. When Chris grabbed his arm, he was slapped in the face and questioned about how he dared to touch a noble. At that moment, Chris realized that Roman had never truly trained. His strength was average, even below that of a common adult man. It was pathetic. For a moment, Chris even considered killing him out of anger. And now he would have to duel him in front of everyone, including the Lord himself. Chris still tried to tell the captain that it was not appropriate, but Jonathan replied that young Master Roman was a specialist who had faced the Bloodfangs alone. For it to be a fair match, someone of equal level needed to face him. Faced with that, Chris obeyed. Later, the two were already in the arena for the duel. Before it began, Chris made a request. He had been taught to treat any duel as a real battle, especially when swords were involved. It did not matter who the opponent was. He did not intend to show mercy. If they accepted that condition, he would assume the honor of dueling the young master. Lord Romero allowed it. When Chris looked at Roman, he saw a smile on his face, and that only increased his irritation. Jonathan then ordered both of them to prepare. The two agreed to the conditions, and as soon as the duel began, Chris advanced first, determined to end it quickly. He attacked with everything he had, but even so, Roman blocked the strike. Without moving his legs, without wasting energy, he simply blocked with precision. Chris felt a repulsive force in that impact, and realized that even Roman's defensive posture was extremely stable. Even so, he thought he could not be satisfied with just exchanging blows. He advanced again with fierce and fast attacks, but missed them all. Roman not only dodged, but did so with elegance. Then he returned a strike so close to Chris' face that it cut a few strands of hair. When he stepped back, Chris realized how dangerous that had been. He did not expect Roman to fight like that. Romero, Jonathan, and the other knights watched in amazement. Chris began to wonder if those were really Roman abilities. He defended, dodged, and attacked like a true knight. Perhaps he really had defeated the Bloodfangs. Even so, Chris decided he would not think about that. His opponent was Roman Dimitri, and he would defeat him there. That was when Roman, already warmed up, decided to attack first. The first strike almost completely destroyed Chris' guard. It was an attack with heavy impact. He continued pressing, striking Chris' sword and forcing him to retreat across the checkered arena. Chris could barely block and was being pushed back more and more. At the decisive moment, Roman delivered a strike so strong that Chris' guard broke completely. He was left totally open, but Roman also left an opening. Chris tried to take advantage of it, but realized too late that it had been intentional. Roman was smiling. He had created that gap on purpose. Jonathan shouted for them to stop, but Chris, unable to accept losing to Roman, invoked his sword aura, the first star aura. The strike generated a powerful explosion. However, Roman simply lowered himself and dodged naturally, as if it were something trivial, and then knocked Chris down. Even with the aura active, Chris had always been a source of pride. Very young, he had been appointed vice commander of the Knights and was a direct disciple of Jonathan. Everyone praised his talent, his intelligence, his speed and strength. They said he already showed an extraordinary level after only half a year of training. In 3 years, he reached the first star aura, and there were rumors that his abilities were already approaching Jonathan. He was considered a genius, but at that moment, he was being defeated by Roman Dimitri. Romero, confused, asked what had just happened. He questioned whether Vice Commander Chris was not a 2-star aura knight. Jonathan confirmed that he was, but could not understand how it was possible. Just a month earlier, Roman was known for causing trouble and showed nothing but lack of control, and now he had defeated Chris. For Jonathan, it was impossible for someone to grow that fast. After the duel, Jonathan declared before Lord Romero that the young master was a true genius with the sword. There was no other explanation for what everyone had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Roman, after defeating Chris, acknowledged that the vice commander knew how to be aggressive and that his focus during battle was extremely sharp. He concluded that Chris could easily deal with the Bloodfangs gang on his own, and understood why Jonathan had so much pride in that boy. Without a doubt, he was a genius. Even so, by the standards of the heavenly demon, that was nothing. Even ordinary soldiers of the demonic order would probably be stronger. The only point that truly caught Roman attention was the so-called sword aura that Chris invoked at the end. That energy seemed strangely familiar. Romero, on the other hand, was radiant. He did not hide his happiness at seeing his son performance, and called him closer, full of pride. He wanted to applaud him, reward him, and asked what he would like to receive. Roman then remembered that in 6 months he would have to go to the battlefield. Romero thought he might want to give up, but Roman made it clear that was not the case. What he wanted was the right to personally choose the men who would accompany him, selecting each one carefully. Romero hesitated, saying there was still time, and that it would be better for him to reconcile with the others, but Roman stated that he would handle that on his own. Convinced, Romero granted him the right to handle things his way. Taking advantage of his father, gratitude in that moment, Roman made one more request. Later, when Chris woke up, he was incredulous upon upon learning that he would have to teach aura to young Master Roman. Jonathan explained that they were direct orders from the Lord and that Roman himself had requested it. Chris found it absurd. He had used aura against the young master and still lost. The only thing he wanted at that moment was to disappear out of shame. Even so, Jonathan made a proposal. If Chris taught Roman and discovered what was different about him, in return he would receive the secrets of the combat arts that made Jonathan a 3-star knight. That immediately caught Chris' attention. He confirmed whether it was serious, and upon receiving confirmation, accepted, but made it clear that the captain should keep his word. That night, Hans commented excitedly that he had heard about the young master achievements in the competition. He remembered that Chris was a 2-star knight and had still been defeated. That was impressive. Roman then asked if Hans knew what aura meant. Hans replied that he believed it was the power of using mana on the sword. Roman thought it made sense, and concluded that in that world, the term used must be mana. He reflected on the power that Chris had demonstrated. It was clearly an eruption of energy, but the use of that energy was different from what he knew from his previous world. What they called aura there seemed inefficient. He did not understand why they used energy in that way, and concluded that the people of that world had not yet discovered the true potential of martial arts. The next day, early in the morning, Chris was already standing before Roman to begin the training. Despite still feeling resentful, he maintained his composure and began explaining what aura was. He said that aura was a subset of mana usage, something specific to knights. While mages stored mana in their circles, knights stored mana throughout their entire body. The precursor of aura had been a man known as Emperor Alexandro, who discovered that spreading mana through the body strengthened it physically. Aura consisted of breaking that stored mana outward, concentrating it at a specific point when necessary. Chris explained that not everyone could use mana that way. Only 1 in every 100,000 men followed the path of an aura knight. While mages were slightly more common, the essential requirement was the ability to feel mana. Many people failed right at that point. He said it took him about half a year to feel mana for the first time, but there were those who took 3, 4, or even 5 years. That was where innate talent made the difference. Roman decided that he would begin by trying to feel mana the way he had been taught, and asked how Chris had done it. Internally, Chris thought that the young master might be too confident after his victory, but feeling mana was not something simple. Talent with the sword and talent for mana were different things, and he almost wanted to see Roman expression when he realized the difficulty. However, while training, Roman realized that the premise of that method was wrong. He already knew how to feel mana. Thanks to the heavenly demon mage, he had learned how to store it, even if in a small amount. Even so, following only his own knowledge could lead him to stagnation. He did not want that. Even without understanding why that world used mana in such a limited way, he decided to learn their method first. After that, he would combine it with his own path. While Roman meditated, Chris spoke around him, guiding him to focus on the rhythm of his breathing and pay attention to everything that was in contact with his body. He explained that by getting used to using mana, he would be able to manifest aura. The first step was to concentrate the mana spread throughout the body into a single point. If he could do that, it would mean he had reached the level of a 1-star knight. Chris also explained that there were several ways to use aura, being able to apply it to the blade to increase attack power or to the body itself to raise resistance, creating small bursts of mana. While explaining, Chris noticed something strange. Roman was already concentrating an absurd amount of mana. A violent aura began to manifest around his body. Even though externally he remained calm and in complete control, for Roman, everything was happening exactly as he had predicted. He reflected that, in that world, the way they used ki was flawed. In the world of Murim, ki was used to purify the body, remove impurities, and gradually allow the true storage of energy. There it was different. They simply gathered mana and let it spread naturally throughout the body, without restrictions. Ki was heavy and dense, while the mana of that world was light and abundant, which made it escape easily, like trying to capture smoke with a net. To Roman, the aura methods of that world resembled the external arts of Murim, but the comparison was not worth much. External arts were used to permanently strengthen the body, while there it was only a momentary enhancement. It did not help with the true storage of energy. He concluded that the problem lay precisely in the fact that they broke the stored mana outward, making the process inefficient. Following that path, no one would reach the top, not even with centuries of training. His thoughts were interrupted when Chris asked how he had done that. He said it had taken him years to manifest an aura of that level, and demanded that Roman be honest. He believed the young master had been pretending not to know how to use mana from the beginning. That now made sense to him. It seemed too strange that someone would ask to learn from zero, and suddenly display that. Roman replied that he was completely misunderstanding everything. Chris questioned how that could make sense, since he himself had taken more than 10 years to become a 2-star knight. Then Roman let out a slight laugh and asked if, while pursuing that goal, he had ever questioned the training methods he used. Chris did not understand what he meant. Calmly, Roman explained that it was common for people to accept old methods as absolute truths. The human brain worked that way. If something was passed down through generations, it was automatically considered correct. He himself had already learned aura in that world, and kept wondering why everyone was so attached to a method with obvious flaws. Perhaps they did not notice the problems, or perhaps they simply believed it because someone like Jonathan said it was right. In the end, it was easier to teach that way. Teaching one's own path required responsibility and open space for criticism and failure. He made it clear that he was not dismissing Chris' 10 years of training. That had been important, but during all that time, he could have questioned the method. There is no perfect answer or absolute method. Every system is born from someone, concerns for their successors. Roman himself, in his past life, had also created methods based on his own limitations and experiences. He continued by saying that said, when faced with flaws and criticism, one must step out of the comfort zone. Change is necessary. One should not accept things simply because they have always been done that way. After that, he stated that they could end the training there. Chris, still stunned, asked him to say what he should do now. That made Roman remember his past life. He recalled a young man he had defeated when he was already older and more powerful. The boy admitted defeat and decided to follow Hugh of the Heavenly Demon Sect. It was the first time he had seen someone so strong, and setting aside his pride, he asked to be guided on that path and learn how to become strong. Roman realized that that young man from the past was very similar to Chris. He smiled when he noticed that the bloody demon had been a remarkable figure in the world of Muram, someone who deeply influenced the demonic blood sect. The confrontation between him and Hugh had been inevitable, and in the end, Hugh won. Even so, that young man had the courage to abandon his pride in order to learn. For Roman, that was the true capacity of someone who wished to become stronger, and that was exactly what he was seeing now in Chris. He saw in the boy the same spark he had once seen in the bloody demon. Roman made it clear that he could not simply hand Chris a ready answer. If he did that, he would be making the same mistake he criticized. He only said that Chris should not blindly follow the methods taught his entire life. If he were to give a fixed answer, it would be no different from the system he himself was questioning. Chris needed to research, learn, and discover with his own hands. Then Roman made an invitation. He asked Chris to stay by his side. In 6 months, he would go to war. If Chris accompanied him, he could observe up close how he faced his enemies, how he evolved with each battle, and how he sought to become stronger with every victory. He promised that if he went with him to the battlefield, he would find his own answer. Later, in his room, Chris reflected on all of that. He remembered how he had always been called a prodigy, how people said he was strong, and that he had achieved everything very quickly. But he began to realize that perhaps those compliments had become invisible chains, keeping him trapped and too comfortable. The next morning, he went to Commander Jonathan's office and declared that he would follow the young master to the battlefield because he wanted to become stronger. Jonathan stared at him in silence for a while, and then agreed. He said that now Chris had a legitimate reason to go to war. From that moment on, he would no longer be part of the Knights of Dimitri. No matter what happened, he should protect young Master Roman while pursuing his own goal. Chris thanked him for the order. As Jonathan observed him, he thought that he was no longer the boy he had found on the battlefield beside his dead parents. Now he was a true warrior. Before leaving, he decided to give him something. He said that if he was willing to follow Roman, then he could no longer be called an idiot, and before going to war, he would need a secret weapon to survive. Chris became visibly excited upon hearing that. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread through the city about young Master Roman. They said that he had defeated the Bloodfangs, something impressive for someone who had once been considered nothing more than a useless noble. Some believed it, others thought it was impossible. Among those who heard the rumors was Kevin, the boy who had been saved by Roman. He knew the truth. He had seen with his own eyes the young master defeat the Bloodfangs using only a branch. For him, there was no doubt that Roman could defeat anyone. He even wondered if it had been done to keep the promise made to a commoner like him, but soon shook his head, thinking it was impossible that someone like Roman would do something so grand because of him. A coworker called him to pay attention to his work, and Kevin returned to his tasks. Even so, he could not stop thinking. He wanted to become someone like young Master Roman, someone strong enough to protect the people around him. He knew that groups like the Bloodfangs still existed in that world. He wanted to become strong to protect his own family, but he had no idea how to do it. He thought that if he had another chance to meet the young master, perhaps he could change his fate. At that moment, he heard someone call his name. It was Roman himself. Surprised, Kevin asked what he was doing there. Before anything else, he knelt and deeply thanked him. He said that thanks to the young master, his family had survived, that he had gotten a job, and that his life was much better. The Bloodfangs had stopped threatening them, and he did not know how to express so much gratitude. Roman listened calmly and said that he might have a proposal. If Kevin accepted, he would never have to worry about his family financial problems again. He would have a comfortable home, good food, and even a luxurious life, but the work would be hard. The condition was simple. Kevin would have to live for him. If he was able to swear loyalty, he would receive a life he would not regret. Without hesitation, Kevin pressed his head to the ground and swore his life to the young master. He said that if he were ordered to die, he would die. If he were ordered to kill, he would kill, as long as his family was protected. Hearing that, Roman realized that the boy showed an almost instinctive loyalty, a loyalty that reminded him of the mad demon from his past life. He recalled how that man, with a single order, would massacre hundreds of enemies without ever retreating. That was why he had received that nickname. Roman reflected that Chris resembled the bloody demon, while Kevin resembled the mad demon. With that in mind, he declared that from that moment on, Kevin would serve him for life. And what happened next was something truly shocking. Later at the main estate, Roman introduced Kevin to Hans, telling him to help him get settled there and get used to life in that place. He also stated that he would make a point of visiting Kevin later, and asked him to take care of himself. Kevin thanked the young master greatly, and Roman replied that he would be in his personal library, so if he needed anything, he could just go there. After that, Roman was studying about aura knights throughout history. To become an aura knight, it was first necessary to manifest one's own aura, and that marked someone as a first-star aura knight. To reach 2 stars, it was necessary to be able to cut steel using aura. The intensity and strength of that aura determined the knight rank. A 3-star knight was already beyond common understanding. On the Salamander continent, there were even 6-star knights, but there was no record of anyone who had reached the 7th star. Even among the 10 most powerful, not all had reached the 6-star rank, something extremely rare. Roman confirmed with Chris the strength of a 2-star knight. To him, even Jonathan, with his 3 stars, course, was nothing more than a second-rate fighter. The fact that someone had reached the 6-star rank meant they had gone beyond human limits. The story said that a strike from someone at that level was like the impact of another world. Currently, there were 12 people who had reached that rank, treated as royalty regardless of race, nationality, or origin. They were known as the 12 Blades of the Continent. With all that information, Roman realized that they were indeed very strong. The fact that they had reached so far even using Chris power in such an inefficient way showed that they were extremely talented. Even so, he remembered that there were also mages, such as the Archmage. Those who reached the 7th circle of mana were considered half man, half god, true walking disasters waiting to destroy the continent. A single spell from an Archmage could level the land and darken the skies. In numerical terms, they were even more dangerous than several 6-star Aura Knights. Roman thought that magic did not exist in his previous world, but now he already had a good idea of what he needed to do. He did not know when he would face that being, although it was rare for old Dimitri to do anything risky. Even so, now in this new body, he himself tended to do dangerous things to become stronger. He was never meant to remain still like the others, and felt that he was about to begin a very exciting journey. Later, he was with Hans in front of the doors of an old workshop that belonged to the Baron. Hans explained that he had ensured that outsiders were strictly forbidden from entering, as if not even the air could pass through there. Roman said that would be perfect for training, and stated that he would spend a week in that workshop. He would not need food or water, and no one could enter. It would only be allowed to interrupt him if the people were in serious danger, something at a disastrous level. Hans agreed and closed the doors, leaving Roman completely isolated from the world. Alone, Roman removed everything that was in the way, sat in the lotus position, and began to cultivate his mana. Until then, he had only accumulated a small amount of it, enough to use a few techniques of the heavenly demonic mage. Now he was taking his first real step. He began to remove all the impurities from his own body. Blood started to flow from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears at the same time. He had already expected that to happen, as he needed to gather the minimum amount of mana required to advance to the first stage. His goal was to recover his original strength. He had already decided to live in that world and protect it. Entering the superhuman stage was only the beginning. A week later, Baron Lawrence and his daughter were at a very formal meeting when the Baron asked where Roman was. A subordinate replied that he was taking care of some matters at the moment. Alone in the reception room, the Baron commented that even if they decided to visit him on a whim, they were clearly not desired there, and would have to wait for the young master presence. He asked Flora to sit down and said that he had come to apologize for his mistake, instructing his daughter to be very careful with what she said in that place. Flora replied that it was fine. Father, when she informed him that she had announced the separation, he was completely shocked. But Flora said that she had decided to share her thoughts during the last visit, and that she also wanted to follow her father's orders. But she could not marry someone she did not respect. The Baron truly thought she was a wise child, and had never imagined she would do something like that, so he asked if she did not understand what was happening within their territory. The Baron family had borrowed a large amount from the Golden Bank, and because of that, the only thing left was to prepare for war. The arranged marriage with the Dimitri had been a necessary decision to protect them. Even so, Flora insisted that the Lawrence were not weak, and that even without the Dimitri, they still had a chance. The Baron explained that if it were only the Barco family, it might be possible to deal with the situation, but the problem was that the central government had approved suspicious documents and orders from them. The fact that they had allowed the Barco to borrow money without offering anything in return showed that they were already preparing for war. They wanted to see the Lawrence family fall. Now that they had a valid justification, they would do everything to take their lands, their honor, and even her. In the reception room, Flora was nervous. She knew the circumstances of the territory, and understood what her father had taken into consideration when making that decision. Even understanding everything, she had ignored it for selfish reasons. She thought that if she continued clinging to the pride of being the flower of Lawrence, there might be nothing left in the end. Meanwhile, Hans was worried, wondering what he should do. The young master had still not come out. The Baron and the young lady had been waiting since morning, and it was already sunset. They seemed increasingly dissatisfied, but the young master had been clear in saying that he did not want to be disturbed. It was then that finally, he came out of the cabin. Hans was completely shocked when he saw him. Later, still in the reception room, the Baron thought that everything had been caused by a mistake from Flora. He needed to ensure that the marriage happened, so that the territory would survive. Even so, he felt that something was wrong. He could not accept that idea of forced respect, and decided that he would meet Dimitri personally. He went to Romero's office, pushed the doors open forcefully, and asked what he was doing, why he was making the guests wait like that. If he was not satisfied with their presence, he could have simply sent them away at once. Romero continued signing documents calmly, and said that he understood what he meant, but that he had not scheduled any meeting. Baron Lawrence replied that he knew very well he had decided to visit without scheduling, but that they had already declared their intentions in a meeting a week earlier. They had no choice but to act that way, since he refused the request, and gave no response. Romero asked if he really thought he would refuse a visit from a baron, but questioned if that was all he had to say, if he was there only because he was irritated after waiting half a day. He explained that, on the day Flora Lawrence visited the Dimitri family, Roman made his own intention to cancel the arranged marriage clear. Of course, Romero reprimanded him for that decision, since even a child would understand what was happening. But the fact was that Flora was the reason Roman wanted to cancel the marriage. Even having an idea of why, Romero did not question it. When he reflected on Roman reasons, he simply remained silent and ignored what he had said. Everyone in that room were victims of arranged marriages they did not want. The ones who first first wanted that marriage were the Lawrence. Even so, the Baron appeared there believing his anger was justified, even though he had been the one who did not want a meeting in the beginning. He ignored his own mistakes and still dared to open the office door and complain. About a month earlier, the Barco family had contacted them. They said that if the Dimitri gave up the marriage with the Lawrence and proceeded with an arranged marriage with the Barco, they would gain access to contracts with the central government. Even so, Romero refused the proposal from the Barco family and asked if Baron Lawrence would have done the same. The Baron replied that he did not know about that, but admitted that, for him, it would have been more advantageous to accept the Barco offer. Romero explained that the reason was simple. Since the Dimitri possessed power, he chose the option that pleased him the most. Romero's son had affection for the Baron daughter, and it was for that reason that the Dimitri family decided to face even a possible war against the Barco family. Upon hearing that, Baron Lawrence felt deeply ashamed of what he had done. He realized that he should have remained calm, but ended up making a great mistake by acting impulsively. Romero explained that the flower of Lawrence and the idiot of Dimitri knew they were not exactly the best match. Everyone knew that. Even so, they should have remembered what the Dimitri family truly valued. Besides that, the ones who were desperate for that marriage to happen were the Lawrence themselves. Hearing that, Flora felt her face burn with shame. She remembered the time when she was young, the days at the academy where the children of noble families went to gain knowledge and form alliances. In that environment, there was a family so small that its relevance was constantly questioned. The Joel family, which seemed to exist only in name, in a world full of children who believed themselves to be treasures for being born into important families. The Joel were the exception. One day, a boy from that family made a small mistake. While children from renowned families would suffer almost no consequences, he was judged by the committee. The man who seemed to be his father appeared and begged for forgiveness, pleading for them to spare his son, and promising that he would teach him better, since they might not have another opportunity. Flora watched all of that from a distance, thinking it was sad. Now remembering the scene, it even seemed ironic, because it was as if she was in that same position. The Baron then declared that as the leader of the Lawrence family, he had nothing more to add. His daughter had not thought properly, and had made a serious mistake, so he asked for forgiveness for that. Flora also lowered her head. At that moment, Roman appeared. She realized the truth of the situation too late. When he entered the room, his hair was white, something that caught everyone's attention. Romero asked if he had finished his training, and commented that they could talk about what had happened to his appearance later. First, they needed to resolve the matter of the arranged marriage, since everything began with a decision from the Lawrence. As the leader of the Dimitri family, and as a father, he needed to deal with that. Roman said that he understood very well what the union of the two families would cause. With the threat of the Barco family over the Lawrence, the influence of the Dimitri would guarantee their survival. Romeo asked if, even so, he intended to proceed with the marriage. Roman admitted that in the past, he thought it was a good decision. However, on the day he met Flora for the first time, his thoughts began to change. After hearing what she truly thought, it became clear to him that it would not work. He said that the rumors about the idiot of Dimitri also influenced her decision. Flora believed she could not marry someone like him based on what she had heard. The rumors determined the outcome of all of that. Roman stated that no matter how people chose to judge him, he expected to spend his life with someone who judged him by what they witnessed, not by what they heard from others. That was why he did not want to change his decision, and wished for the marriage to be cancelled. Faced with that, the Lawrence did nothing but lower their heads. The Baron thought that at that moment everything was over. The arranged marriage had been their last move to protect the territory, and now it was lost. They would have to resolve the problem using only the resources of the Lawrence family. If the Dimitri and the Barco decided to join forces, defeat would be certain. Even so, he decided that he would still try to avoid the worst, starting by asking for forgiveness once again. Baron Lawrence said that as a form of compensation, he would temporarily not charge taxes from the merchants of the Dimitri family who passed through his lands. He knew that such a small amount meant nothing to the owners of the iron mines, but he hoped that it would at least serve as a sincere apology. Romero replied that it was not necessary to do that. The Dimitri family had no interest in profits when it came to problems that could lead to greater consequences in the future. Even so, he asked that it be publicly announced that Flora Lawrence had to end the relationship for personal reasons. If it were done that way, there would be no reason for the Dimitri to approach the Barco family or work with them. The Baron thanked him for the consideration. Before leaving, he cast one last look at Roman Dimitri. At that moment, he realized that if he had understood the true value of the young man earlier, he would have been far more careful in allowing Flora to make impulsive decisions. He recognized that he had also made a great mistake. After the Lawrence left, Romero called his son and asked what the hell had happened to him during that week. During those days, Roman had remained isolated in the warehouse, training his body and removing impurities to reach the stage of an enhanced human. At this stage, there are steps that prepare the body to become a heavenly demonic mage. Even though by Muriam's standards this was not so extraordinary, the great amount of mana in that world also carried many impurities. Preparing the foundation of the body had already caused visible changes. His appearance was proof that he had become someone different, but to his father, he explained only that. While training alone, he had managed to open his own mind. He said he did not understand all the details, but now mana was circulating throughout his body. Romero asked if he was talking about mana circulation, a rare phenomenon in which the mana of nature within the body improves all physical capabilities. Seeing Roman Dimitri, once considered the idiot of the family, accomplish things like eliminating the blood fangs and reaching something like this, left Romero deeply impressed. He was growing beyond simple mana compression. Even so, he was still his son. Romero stated that as a father, he would guarantee guarantee support whenever it was needed. He asked him to never forget that his name was Roman Dimitri, and that he, Romero Dimitri, would always stand by his side, even from afar. In his past life, Jung-hyuk had never received that kind of love. Now he had a father who was neither cold nor ruthless. Someone who supported his son without hidden intentions. He felt sincere gratitude for that. When he left the office, Flora was waiting for him outside. She apologized for judging him too quickly, and for everything that had happened. Roman simply replied that she did not need to apologize. Flora said she understood the reasons why he might be angry, even though it was an arranged marriage that neither of them wanted. She admitted that she had broken the promise without discussing it with the others, but she wanted to say that while she still had the chance, she explained that she had a special reason for canceling the marriage. Flora explained that during a social gathering where all the royal families of the Northeast were gathered, rumors had appeared that she would become engaged to one of the Dimitri. It was at that event that she heard that Roman Dimitri was a delinquent, addicted to alcohol and drugs. She said that drugs corrode a person's sanity and knowledge, and that this was one of the main reasons that led her to want to cancel the marriage. Even though she now knew the rumors were false, it had weighed heavily on her decision. Roman replied that regardless of what had happened in the past, it did not change their relationship now, and that she no longer needed to worry about it. After that, he left without adding anything more. Later, in his chambers, Roman began to reflect on the issue of drugs. He had never felt any substance of that kind circulating in his own body. What he had found were traces of medicines used to take his own life, but even those residues had disappeared when he completed his training. He needed an external perspective, so he asked Hans if he had ever seen him using drugs or suspected something like that. He made it clear that he was asking seriously. Hans replied that he had never seen it with his own eyes, but there had been strange moments. About a month earlier, Roman had returned from a party. That in itself was not unusual, but he came back in a different state. Shortly afterward, he completely lost the will to live, isolated himself in his room, and began asking for excessive amounts of alcohol every night. Because of that, Hans suspected that he might have used drugs, but now he thought it was unlikely. Remembering what Flora had said about the social gathering, Roman asked who the host had been. Hans replied that it was Anthony Barco, the eldest son of the Barco family. Everything then began to fall into place. He had an arranged marriage with the Lawrence family. He had been invited to a Barco party, and shortly afterward there had been a sudden change in his mental state. He realized that something had been wrong from the beginning. In the testament left by the former Roman, it only stated that he would go to war in place of his brothers, and that he was afraid, but that made no sense. As a noble, there were many ways to avoid going to war. Besides, he had already promised to marry Flora. Fear did not fit that situation. Roman asked Hans if he and Anthony had been close. Hans replied that the young master did not spend time with anyone, and that with all due respect, he seemed to be on bad terms with Anthony, especially around the time when discussions about the marriage with the Lawrence family began. That made everything even clearer. The marriage between Dimitri and Lawrence was a major obstacle for the Barco family, who wanted to control the Lawrence lands. The simplest way to solve that would be to prevent the marriage by eliminating one of the people involved. It was likely that they had used every kind of scheme, and that may have led the former Roman to his death. Hans then remembered something important. A few days earlier, an invitation from the Barco family had arrived, but it had coincided with the period when Roman decided to train in isolation. Hearing that, Roman thought that those people were superficial and still underestimated him, and that kind of attitude irritated him deeply. The party would take place in 2 weeks. He ordered a reply saying that he would attend. The next morning, Hans brought Kevin to the young master, warning him not to be surprised by his new appearance and presence. When Kevin saw Roman with white hair, he was shocked. In the training area, Roman asked how he was adapting. Kevin replied that he was getting used to things, thanks to Hans's help, but he had been thinking about his role there. He did not know exactly how he could serve him or be useful. Roman told him not to worry because that was exactly why he had called him. He explained that Kevin's role would be to become his sword. Kevin was confused and asked if he would really be his sword. Roman replied that the value of a person is not determined by the will of others, and that was why he would give him 3 paths to choose from. The first path was to give up wielding a sword. If he was afraid of blood, he would not need to fight. He could use his own hands and feet to serve, learning from Hans and doing whatever he was ordered. That would be his role. The second path would be to become his sword and remain by his side, protecting him directly. But Kevin admitted that he had never even touched a sword. Roman said he understood, and that was exactly why, if he chose the second path, his will would be tested with methods that would cause excruciating pain. He spoke about the bone displacement technique, a method capable of causing intense suffering in the bones and muscles. Those would not be empty words. The third option was even more extreme. Roman placed the sword in front of him and said he could take it and cut off his own arm. If he were able to endure the pain he himself would cause and still remain standing at the end, he would become stronger than anyone else at a pace far beyond normal. Roman remembered the mad demon from his past life, who had grown up on the streets without even knowing what it meant to be a martial artist, and who, through sheer will to fight, had become one of the 4 heavenly kings. Now he wanted to test Kevin. How he would be used depended entirely on his own choice. Kevin had been born outside Mithril Castle in an old house that could collapse at any moment. Since childhood, he had needed to work to survive. By helping his parents, he learned all kinds of manual labor. Even so, his life never escaped poverty. No matter how hard he worked, someone always appeared to take away the little he had. But there was something he could not forget: the overwhelming strength that the young master Roman had shown. With fear, he grabbed the sword. He thought that if he could become stronger and at least imitate that strength, maybe he could escape that life. He said he would cut off his own arm. He took a deep breath. breath, hesitated for a moment, but then swung the sword at himself. Meanwhile, Chris was walking through the corridors, thinking that he had decided to leave the knights to follow young Master Roman, but the young man had spent an entire week training in isolation. Chris went to Hans and said he had heard that the young master had finished training and asked where he was. Hans replied that he was having a conversation with Kevin and that no one should interrupt. Chris asked who Kevin was. At that exact moment, Kevin believed he had torn off his own arm and fainted from the pain. Roman observed everything in silence. Later, Hans noticed the blood on the sword and asked when the young master had injured himself. Roman told him not to worry because the blood was not his. At the moment when Kevin was about to mutilate himself, Roman used the enchantment of the demon of illusion. Kevin thought he had cut off his own arm, but it had not really happened. If the spell had been a little weaker, he would truly have injured himself. Roman reflected that there were 2 weeks left until the party and 6 months until the war. He had a lot to teach those 2 boys. His routine would become busy. After that, he explained to Kevin that he would begin teaching him an extremely dangerous mana enhancement technique. It was not something common. It was the same technique used by the mad demon in his past life, an ancient martial art kept in the treasury of the main house. The divine soul technique was dangerous because it devoured the spirit of the user and allowed him to exert power under extreme pain. Even if all the limbs were cut off, the practitioner could never lose his spirit. The mad demon had been useful in the past precisely because he mastered this technique through intense suffering. If Kevin had enough will to cut off his own arm, even within an illusion, then he had the potential to learn it. Roman warned that as the technique evolves, the pain becomes far greater than any ordinary man can endure. He explained that there was a reason for teaching it. It was the fastest method to strengthen someone who had not yet even mastered the basics of mana. If Kevin mastered it, he would have enough strength to protect whoever he wished. Unable to express all his gratitude, Kevin asked why Roman trusted him. He said he could swear his life, but he had not proven anything yet. He could even run away after learning the technique. Roman did not answer the question. He only said that the training would begin the next day. He remembered that the mad demon had asked the same question in his past life. Unconditional trust only exists when one believes in the person. Roman knew Kevin would not betray him. As he became stronger, he would also understand how dangerous it is to betray the heavenly demon. Later, Kevin was already in the training field practicing fencing. He struck repeatedly with the wooden sword, repeating the basic movements without stopping. Chris was only watching without understanding anything that was happening. He could not understand why Roman was teaching fencing to that strange boy while simply ignoring him. In his mind, he had decided to follow Roman precisely to find a quick way to become stronger, but so far he had received nothing. Not guidance, not training, nothing. It was as if he did not even exist. For a moment he thought about returning to Jonathan, but gave up on the idea and decided to wait a little longer. But 3 days passed and it continued the same way. So he finally approached Roman and reminded him that it had already been more than 2 weeks since he decided to follow him. During the first week, Roman trained in isolation, and in the second, he only saw Roman training Kevin. He even apologized if the reason for that indifference was the rude way he had acted at the beginning, saying that he was confident he could learn something. Roman explained that he had already said before that he should learn by observing. Each person had their own way of learning. He knew Kevin knew nothing, so he needed to guide him from beginning to end until he reached a certain level. But Chris was different. No matter what he was taught, he would try to force himself to learn, simply because he had been defeated, instead of truly trying to understand. That was why observing was the best path for him at that moment. Even so, Roman threw a wooden sword to him and said that he needed results to accept the truth. He suggested that he fight against Kevin, and explained that during the fight, even though Kevin would be the opponent, he would advise him on how to defeat Chris. It would basically be a copy of himself. If after that fight Chris still thought he was right, then he would begin to be taught personally. Kevin was frightened when he learned that he would face a 2-star knight. Chris, on the other hand, was irritated about having to fight a rookie, but accepted because he wanted to prove right there that he was not just anyone. Roman made it clear to Kevin that he was at a disadvantage, but that he would lose nothing with defeat. He reminded him that there were people much stronger than him in that blood company that had oppressed his family. If he always ran away, nothing would ever change. That motivated Kevin, who decided to try. When the fight began, Chris rushed forward with everything. At that exact moment, Kevin heard a voice inside his own head warning that a surprise attack was coming, and he managed to block it. The voice told him to take a step to the side and aim for Chris's chest, but because of his own lack of coordination, he stumbled and was knocked down. The voice was Roman's, who explained telepathically that this was called sound conduction, a method of transmitting sound through mana, allowing him to give instructions directly into Kevin's mind. When he stood up, Kevin received another order to throw himself to the right, and managed to dodge a strike. He turned and tried to attack Chris's chest, but took another kick and fell again. He could see the openings in his opponent's guard, but his body was too weak and slow to keep up. Even when he blocked as instructed, he still ended up taking hits. Chris began to notice that the boy was resisting better than he expected. Roman knew that Kevin was not a match for him because the body could not keep up with the commands, but he also noticed that the boy seemed to be enjoying himself despite the beating. Kevin understood that his biggest problem was his own body, but he continued obeying every instruction from his master. The fight looked like a duel of puppets being guided. At one point, Kevin almost managed to counterattack, but he took a punch to the face and fell again. Chris thought he had already tried to knock him out and that maybe everything was just coincidence. Meanwhile, Kevin thought that even Chris, considered the greatest genius of the Demetrius, did not come close to the abilities of the young master. That only increased his confidence in Roman. He decided that he would follow his words even if they did not make logical sense, because he believed believed that was the only way to become strong enough to be his sword. As time passed, Kevin was already spitting a lot of blood. Chris told him to give up before he became deformed or covered in scars. Even so, Kevin only laughed while spitting blood and decided to continue until the end. Seeing that, Chris decided to finish it all at once. But Kevin kept obeying every order from young Master Roman. He attacked in the right direction, and with the right power. The sword finally struck Chris's arm, completely breaking his guard, and Kevin advanced again without hesitation. But Chris noticed something strange about Roman. He was paying too much attention, as if he were anticipating every movement. When he realized that Kevin's next attack would be a feint, he dodged at the exact moment and ended the fight with a decisive strike, knocking Kevin down. Unconscious, Kevin was carried by Roman, who declared that Chris had won. As promised, he would start teaching him personally starting the next day, if he wanted. Later, alone in his room, Chris began wondering why he had accepted that fight, if he had gained nothing from the victory. It seemed like he had only wasted time. But then he remembered the last maneuver. It was exactly the same situation he had been in when he faced Roman. He had reviewed that moment hundreds of times in his mind. That was why he managed to defeat Kevin. In the end, he learned. He really learned. The next morning, Roman asked what he wanted to do. Chris answered that he did not need direct teachings. He preferred to find his own path to become stronger while following him. He realized that he had grown just from that duel, but because he first observed, now he understood the master's intentions. Roman was not only teaching Kevin when he spoke, he was also teaching him. At that moment, Chris began to see Roman as someone even above Captain Jonathan. When he spoke about observing and learning, it was to enlighten him while he watched. From then on, he would learn everything. Roman was satisfied when he realized this. A week passed and the day of the party organized by the Barco family arrived. During that week, new rumors about Roman Dmitri spread. They said he had divorced Flora because of a mistake she made. Commoners, nobles, and servants talked about the subject. Many were also worried about the situation of the Barcos, but one person was especially happy about the news. Anthony Barco, the eldest son of the Viscount, commented that Roman was easy to manipulate. He confirmed his presence at the party and said that everything was going as planned. It had been a long time since he felt this excited. On the day of the party, Roman asked Hans if he really needed to wear those flashy clothes. Hans explained that it was his first public appearance since the divorce, and that he could not dress carelessly. He said that he had devoted himself completely to create that work of art, especially for him. In the end, Roman agreed to wear the outfit. Outside, waiting in the carriage, Chris complained about the delay, saying that at that rate, the young master would arrive first. Kevin appeared apologizing, still clumsy inside the armor. The boots were out of place, the helmet crooked, and his whole posture looked strange. Chris asked why he was dressed like that. Kevin explained that he had not found many armors that fit him, not even at the blacksmith. Chris thought that even with the master's help, he had almost lost to that boy. He then warned him that both of them were the escort of their lord, and also represented the face of the Demetris. They needed to act like true knights, and be careful even with their words. Kevin replied respectfully that he would keep that in mind. Chris felt a certain pride at being called Lord Knight, and said that he could ask any questions, while adjusting the crooked helmet again. At the party, the nobles were restless. Many doubted that Roman would really appear. They commented that he had just broken a political marriage after realizing that the Barcos were targeting the Lawrences. Some called him an idiot. They said the position of the Dmitri family had become confusing because of him. Even being a central force of the Northeast, maintaining relations with the Barcos seemed like greed or recklessness. Others did not even know who Roman Dmitri was, but they heard that no explanation was needed. It was enough to meet him to understand because he always left a striking impression. Then the eldest son of the Dmitri family finally arrived. He appeared wearing extremely elegant formal clothes, and the guests were confused. They asked if that really was Roman, if he had grown taller, and why his hair looked different. At that moment, the woman who had appeared earlier, Sophia Grazel, approached and formally introduced herself, saying that perhaps he had never heard about her or her family. She explained that her father, Baron Grizzle, had dedicated his entire life to the kingdom. Roman replied naturally that he knew the Grizzle family very well. He said it would be impossible not to know a lineage with centuries of history. He had read everything in books. He had even asked Hans for works about the northern families, because since he would participate as a representative of the Demetris, he needed at least to demonstrate courtesy. He memorized the origin of each family he would meet, and also their legacies. He needed to make an effort to create good connections, especially being known as the so-called idiot of the Demetris. He commented that the Grisels were not the family that had lived for a long time in the Northeast, and that the Grisel Lumber Company was famous for its quality in the Kingdom of Cairo. He also mentioned that he had heard that Sophia Grisel's brother had achieved great success in Manhwa, and even congratulated her for it. The people around were shocked to see how Roman conducted the conversation with so much confidence. Soon other nobles approached. Magna Volte came to greet him, and Roman said it was a pleasure to meet him, remembering his extraordinary achievements in battles in the past. Magna thanked him for the recognition, and little by little more people began to gather around Roman, as if he were someone extremely pleasant to talk to. One of them even admitted that he had judged him wrong, and that in truth he seemed like a righteous and respectable man. Roman commented that he had even thought about starting to drink at that party, but decided to abstain because of his own history in the past. At that moment, the main butler of the house informed him that the young master was inviting him to the back room. Roman understood that he would soon discover who was trying to harm him. Outside, Chris and Kevin stood as escorts surrounded by knights from other families. Chris explained that each family present was accompanied by their own guards. Kevin, curious, asked what exactly a social party was. Chris replied that he would probably never set foot in Roma, so he did not need to worry worry about that kind of detail. And once again, he had to adjust Kevin's crooked helmet. Some knights approached and started mocking them, saying that the boy looked ridiculous. One of them commented that he had heard rumors about Roman Dmitri, the abandoned eldest son, but did not believe he would have the courage to bring a kid who barely knew how to hold a sword. Chris tried to ignore them, but another one provoked them, saying that this was the level of the Dmitri family. That made Kevin's blood boil. Meanwhile, Roman walked to meet Anthony Barco. He remembered when he first met Flora, just admiring her beauty and feeling incredulous about the situation. At that time, Anthony had approached, asking where he was looking, and introduced the young blonde woman as Flora Lawrence. Now facing Anthony once again, Roman commented that it had been a long time since the last time they had seen each other. Anthony replied that he had changed a lot, more than he had imagined, and invited him to sit down and talk. Roman noticed that the table was full of drinks, and that there were clear signs that other people had been there before. The fact that they had left before his arrival indicated that the conversation would be secret, something that could not be heard by anyone else. Roman commented that, well, he used to spend a lot of money trying to change, but in the end he ended up changing little by little, day after day. Even so, he said it was good to see him again. Anthony replied that maybe it was better that way, because honestly, he would rather not even know what Roman had been thinking back then. He remembered when Roman had been pushed into a political marriage with the Lawrence family, and also the episode when he was caught sleeping with his own cousin in a back room. That had truly been shocking. At a social party like that where everyone pretended to keep secrets, it still seemed absurd that something like that had happened, especially with his marriage approaching. That was why he said he understood the reason Roman had appeared at that party. Then Anthony asked why Roman had accepted his proposal. He guaranteed that he would keep the matter secret, and commented that this way they could discuss the marriage with the Barco family. At that moment, Roman suddenly received a memory from the past. He remembered that even after betraying Anthony and the Barco family, he had begged his own father to establish a political marriage with the Lawrence family. He knew that he could not run from them forever, and thought about using that opportunity to restore the relationship. Soon after, Roman entered the same room together with Anthony and his cousin Emily Barco. Anthony asked if it was fine for her to drink with them, since she had been walking around alone, and it was her first time appearing there. Roman replied that there was no problem at all, since he himself had invited her. It was during that small gathering that Anthony confronted him about the marriage with the Lawrence family. He told Roman not to worry because the Barco family no longer cared about the Lawrence family, and told him to drink as much as he wanted. Roman ended up drinking too much and became unconscious. When he woke up, he was in bed beside Emily. He did not even know how he had ended up there. That was when Anthony appeared, pretending to have caught the two of them, and asked what Roman was doing with his cousin. After that, Anthony had a direct conversation with him. He said he did not care who Roman slept with, but he had placed his hands on a woman from the Barco family, and that could not simply be ignored. Then he gave him a choice. Either Roman revealed the truth and divorced on his own, or he married a direct descendant of the Barco family to restore the relationship between the families. If he became a man of the Barco family, he would have to endure all the hatred that existed, and even then he would be forgiven. That was how Roman ended up in that situation. With that memory returning to his mind, Roman realized that everything finally made sense. If the marriage had been destroyed because he had placed his hands on a collateral descendant of the Barco family, the honor of the Dmitri family would certainly collapse. They were already criticized for having common origins. Roman did not have the courage to face the fury of his own father, but he also could not choose the other option because he truly loved Flora. He did not want to destroy a marriage that had already been forced and still stain her name in the process. Because of that, the original Roman ended up taking his own life. When the decisive moment arrived, he believed that his death would solve everything. Deep down, he had only been a weak man, someone who had never achieved anything through his own strength. Now that seemed pathetic. Meanwhile, Anthony asked why there was so much hesitation. He explained that the union between the two families could turn the entire northeast region upside down. Together, no one would be able to face them. They would have absolute power in that territory. But Roman questioned whether that alone was the reason he should accept a political marriage. He asked if that was really the proposal. Anthony replied that Roman was misunderstanding. That was not exactly a choice. If he refused, everything that happened in the back room would be exposed. Because of that, he told him to think very carefully before deciding. Then Roman placed his feet on the center table, knocking down everything that was on top of it, and said that he had already spoken enough. The Dmitri family had no reason at all to accept that proposal, much less for such a pathetic reason. After that, he simply returned to the party, as if nothing had happened. The first person to speak with him was Sophia, who asked where he had gone. Roman explained that he needed to take care of something, and that he would probably have to leave the party because of it. Sophia commented that the party had barely begun, and that she was really enjoying talking with him. Even so, Roman apologized, not only to her but to everyone. He said it was urgent. At the moment he passed through the main door, he heard someone shouting for the words that had been said to be taken back. Kevin had just taken a punch to the face that knocked off his helmet. He was furious, but Chris told him to calm down. The two knights noticed his anger and stepped closer, continuing to provoke him. One of them commented that it looked like Kevin had grabbed whatever armor he could find and was calling himself an escort. The other said that he was already bad in armor before, but now he looked even worse. Chris, irritated, asked if the knights of the Barco family were trained in jokes instead of swordsmanship. The first man replied mockingly and said that he could probably handle a sword better than that weakling there, even without training. That was why people called their lord an idiot. Hearing that, Kevin demanded that they take back what they had said, but ended up receiving another punch to the face. Chris almost drew his sword at that moment, but held himself back when he remembered that those men were knights of the Barco family and that they were inside their territory. If he caused trouble there, the consequences would be enormous. Then Kevin stood up on his own and said that he was his lord's knight and that he had absolutely no interest in dealing or fighting with bandits, pretending to be knights like them. One of the men rushed forward, wanting to see how long he would keep that sharp tongue. But before the next blow could land, the one who grabbed the knight's arm was Roman himself. He stared at the man for a moment and then slapped him straight across the face. It was a firm, aristocratic, and completely democratic slap, because everyone there wanted to see it happen. When the knight tried to complain, he received another. He tried to get up and received another, and he kept getting slapped until he fell to the ground. Even so, Roman told him to lift his head. Meanwhile, Anthony was completely shocked by what had just happened inside his own residence. At the moment, Roman decided to act and show that he was no longer willing to accept provocations. Anthony declared that he was only doing that because he did not want to take responsibility for placing his hands on a lady of the Barco family. He said that the proposal to marry a direct descendant instead of a collateral one had been the last consideration he had for him, and that now Roman was making an irreversible mistake. Roman replied that Anthony could do whatever he wanted. He was already called an idiot anyway, so one or two more rumors would not make any difference. Instead, it might be better to maintain proper conduct. He made it clear that he chose to end the marriage with Flora by his own will, not because of a threat. Ever since the Dimitri family turned their backs on the Lawrence family, Anthony's desire had been more or less fulfilled, but now he was showing his fangs. Then he asked if he really believed that helping the Lawrence family interfere with the Barco family just to relieve personal resentment would be a good idea. Roman had studied the Barco family thoroughly. He knew about their connection with the central government and the influence that came from it, but he also knew that their power existed mainly because of those connections. In terms of wealth and real strength, they were the least powerful house in the Northeast, while the Dimitri family held the superior position above the others. He asked Anthony directly what he would do in that situation. Anthony asked if the matter was settled and whether Roman would not interfere in the affairs of the Lawrence family. Roman replied that he would not interfere. With that, the matter was considered closed. Even so, Anthony, who had always believed he had control over him, realized that Roman had completely changed. It was not just the appearance, it was the actions, the gaze, the way he spoke, and the pressure he placed into every word. At that moment, the butler approached and informed them that Lord Roman and his knight were involved in a fight outside. When they arrived, practically all the guests had already gathered to watch. Roman was beating the knight, who begged for forgiveness and promised that he would never do something like that again. Kevin asked his lord to stop saying that it was already enough, and Chris warned that it could cause serious problems. But Roman declared that he would decide when the punishment was enough. Even if the man died there, it would only be the price for the words and actions he chose to have. At that moment, Anthony appeared, demanding an explanation. He said that even if Roman was the eldest son of the Dimitri family, he would not tolerate that, and that Roman should apologize and immediately leave his territory. Roman, however, questioned why he should do that. That man had laid his hands on someone from the Dimitri family, and he asked if Anthony really believed that he was the one in the wrong. Anthony replied that he had gone too far. Roman then reminded him that personal resentment could destroy not only the relationship between them, but also the balance of all the families of the Northeast. He advised Anthony to keep his actions under control because he was not a very patient man. Then he asked what he would do now. After thinking for a moment, Anthony stated that after reflecting more carefully, Roman was right, and that he himself would have given the same punishment to the knight. Roman replied that it was good to hear that, and told the man to grit his teeth and endure. After some time, he began to leave. He thought that the Roman from before was an idiot who had been disrespected as such because he allowed it. Now that version no longer existed. He called Chris and Kevin to leave with him. Everyone present, and soon the entire Northeast would know that the idiot they once knew no longer existed. On the way back, the atmosphere was heavy and silent. Kevin apologized to his lord for being insulted because of him. Chris also asked for forgiveness, saying that while the name Dimitri was being dishonored and Kevin was being beaten, he did nothing to stop it. Roman replied that he knew it had not been easy to endure that, and thanked them for holding back until he arrived to resolve the situation. He explained that rashness brings chaos, and that their decisions had avoided an even worse situation. Besides that, there was no one in the entire northeast of Cairo who could dare lay hands on the Dimitri family without paying the price. Even if they needed to endure momentary humiliation, they should remember well the faces of those who disrespected them. Roman made it clear that he could not stand seeing anyone above him, and that none of them should forget that. To follow Roman from that day forward, they would have to live standing above everything. They would need to adapt to anything he proposed. Both of them accepted without hesitation. The next morning, Roman asked Hans for information about the Barco family. He requested the data through the Black Moon Guild, and according to the reports he received, the recent movements of the Barco family were quite unusual. The Barco family had been established in the Northeast for a little more than a century. It was during that period that they began to stand out as a powerful house in the region. Around the same time, a member of the family managed to enter the central government. Roman had already researched their military forces and concluded that they were nothing impressive. Hans was surprised, because since the Barco family had achieved such high status, he imagined that their forces would be much more powerful. Roman explained that this only showed how strong the central government truly was. The continent of Salamandra was composed of 2 empires and 6 kingdoms. Among them, the kingdom of Cairo was the smallest and weakest, because it bordered almost all the other kingdoms except for the mountain range in the northeast. Cairo had already suffered several foreign invasions. With strong enemies constantly watching its borders, Cairo had no choice but to unite under the central government. Over time, the central government accumulated strength and authority, especially over military conscription. If a noble family rejected conscription, it was considered rebellious and expelled from the kingdom. After subduing the rebels and confiscating their lands, the government rewarded the neighboring lords who helped suppress them with portions of those lands. That was how the system of influence strengthened the Barco family through political connections. Roman confirmed that this was the path they used to grow. It was also through this method that they obtained a favorable loan from the Grand Gold Bank. They probably took a credit-secured loan, but without offering anything very specific beyond that. The money was invested in the Baird Mercenary Company, formed by hundreds of mercenaries. This group mainly received commissions for participating in battles between territories. After analyzing the situation, Hans concluded that at that pace, the Barco family would attack the Lawrence family within half a month. Roman replied that apparently they had already finished their preparations. For Hans, that meant war, and he believed the Lawrence family would have no chance. Roman stated that even if they resisted, they would not last a month. Even so, he had promised Anthony that he would not interfere in his affairs with the Lawrence family. However, for Roman Dmitri to continue living in peace, he could not simply allow the Barco family to act, especially after being threatened. No matter how much the Barco family had increased their forces, they had no chance against the Dmitri family. If he borrowed the strength of his own family, resolving that would be a simple task. Besides, even though the Dmitri family shared common origins with other houses, the nobles of the Northeast did not see Roman Dmitri as a threat. What he needed at that moment was an opportunity to rise to a greater stage. Because of that, he ordered Hans to find his father. It was time to collect what was owed to him. Meanwhile, in a nearby city, a blood-covered knight walked normally through the streets. It was Lucas, a rank B mercenary, who commented to himself that the Dmitri family had not changed at all. He went to the blacksmith to repair his equipment. The blacksmith commented that the battle that time had been difficult. Lucas answered irritably, saying that he had almost died because of those bastards. The blacksmith examined his equipment and said that the quality was not very good, asking where he had obtained it. Lucas explained that he had bought it at a shop he tried for the first time and almost died because of it. The blacksmith then stated that he had made a common mistake because equipment produced by the Dmitri family was considered the best of the best. That was exactly why Lucas decided to leave his equipment in the care of the blacksmith. The man guaranteed that a complete set would not take long to be ready and suggested that he walk around the city while he waited. Tired of the battlefield, Lucas decided to rest a little by walking through the streets. As he left the blacksmith shop, he noticed that the notice board was surrounded by a crowd. Curious, he approached and saw the announcement that had caught everyone's attention. It was a recruitment notice for private soldiers. The requirements were simple: good health and the desire to become strong. There were 30 positions available with a salary of 8 silver coins per month. Lucas thought it was not a bad amount, considering that the monthly support for a family of 4 was usually between 4 and 5 silver coins. However, there was a special condition. The soldier would belong only to Roman Dmitri, not to the Dmitri family. Only those willing to give their lives for him should apply. A nearby man warned Lucas not to even think about applying, saying that hundreds of people were already interested. Lucas replied that he had no such intention. As a rank B mercenary, he would not give his loyalty for so little. To commit himself in that way, he would demand at least 50 silver coins. Even so, he became intrigued and asked what they meant by hundreds of people applying. He commented that Roman Dmitri was not known as the idiot of the Dmitri family, and it was clear that no one knew what kind of test someone would have to face to become one of his soldiers. When Lucas said that out loud, everyone around him was shocked. He did not understand the reaction and asked what he had said wrong. The man beside him explained that he must be a foreigner because he did not know what was happening. Lord Roman was no longer the same idiot as before. He had destroyed the Bloodfangs by himself and now treated people with respect. At the beginning, no one believed it, so the man did not blame Lucas for doubting, but he himself had begun to change his opinion after what happened to Clark's family. Clark's son, named Kevin, became a subordinate of Roman, and the miserable life of their family changed completely. On the previous night, Kevin had received a 3-day leave. Roman said that resting was also part of training, and that after working hard, he needed to spend some time with his family. Kevin thanked him, and when he returned to the dormitory, he found the whole situation strange. If it had been before, he would not have survived even a single day without working. Taking a break meant going hungry. It had been a long time since he had seen his family. As he was leaving, Hans commented that he must be going to visit them after so long. He also handed him clean clothes and 30 silver coins so Kevin could buy presents. He told him to enjoy his leave. Kevin was surprised and deeply moved. He bought plenty of food, including fresh bread, which was something they could almost never afford. He thought his sister would be happy since she always complained about the hard bread they ate every day. Fresh bread cost twice as much, but he was able to buy it thanks to Roman. Even so, he did not forget what had been done to his family in the past. He wanted to become stronger, not for money, but to make sure that something like that would never happen again. When he arrived at the address that had been given to him, he was confused. Instead of the slums, he found a simple house near the outskirts of the castle with a small garden. His parents were calmly drinking tea. When they saw him, they ran to hug him. Kevin asked what house that was, and his father explained that Hans had appeared bringing the deed and saying they were orders from Lord Roman. In addition, people from the castle were helping them cultivate the land. His mother said that during the last few days they had finally started to feel truly alive. Kevin was emotional, but his father noticed the mark on his face and asked if Lord Roman had hit him. Kevin explained that he had not, and that it had happened during work involving a guard from the Barco territory. He told the whole story about how Roman had confronted a Barco knight to protect him. His father spread the story among acquaintances, and soon the rumor spread across the city. The news that Roman Dmitri had beaten a Barco knight to defend a subordinate passed from mouth to mouth. Little by little, many people began to believe that he truly treated his people with respect. If someone worked for him and earned his trust, they could have a completely different life. The man finished telling all of this to Lucas, who was stunned. The Roman Dmitri he knew was a troublemaker who caused fights in casinos and lived irresponsibly. It did not seem possible that it was the same man. He wondered what had happened during the last 2 years. In the end, he concluded that it was far too interesting to ignore. He decided that he wanted to meet Roman again. Later, Captain Jonathan was speaking with Lord Romero about the preparations for the recruitment examinations. They were organizing a minimum number of soldiers to control the entrance, and Roman would supervise the overall process. Romero asked if everything had already been finalized. Jonathan replied that it was the last chance for recovery, and asked if the Lord truly agreed with that, since forming private soldiers devoted exclusively to one person could be dangerous. Romero explained that when he heard Roman would attend the party, he thought Roman would ally with the Barco to harm the second son in the succession. But in front of all the nobles, Roman had slapped a Barco knight after convincing Anthony. Even while risking the creation of an alliance against himself, he acted in his own way. For more than a decade, Roman had been considered an idiot. After the incident with the Bloodfangs, he began living according to his own will. As a father, Romero said that he only wanted to congratulate him. Then he asked how many people had applied. He imagined something between 50 or 100 candidates, and thought that 50 would already be a relief considering his son's former reputation. Jonathan reported that the estimate was 500 people. When he heard that, Romero was completely surprised, and asked if he had understood correctly. On the following day, many people were gathered at the recruitment site, including Lucas the rank B mercenary, who wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of man Roman Dmitri had become. The atmosphere was full of expectation, with candidates of all kinds waiting for the process to begin. Meanwhile, Chris informed his lord that all the preparations were ready, and that the recruitment could begin at any moment. The day before the test, it was explained what had happened. In a tavern near the place where the test would take place the next morning, Lucas was drinking heavily, but he was not alone because several other people were doing exactly the same thing. He was surprised to realize how many candidates had gathered there on the eve of the test, and he thought that there were far more people than he had expected. In one corner of the tavern, there were 3 men sitting together, and all 3 were rank C. Besides them, it was easy to notice that other people also had real battle experience. Lucas began to think that there were countless ins in Dmitri, and if in that small space alone there were already 5 or 6 decent people, then the overall level of the candidates was much higher than he had imagined. Even so, he did not understand why so many qualified people were there. If they were that capable, they should be able to get something better than that job. He knew it was not just curiosity, but like the others, he could not fully understand it. When he got up to leave, he ended up overhearing a nearby conversation. One of the men asked his friend if he had not said that he would become a soldier of the Lawrence family. Henderson replied that at first that really had been his intention. After all, Lawrence was his hometown. However, after seeing what Roman Dmitri did to the Bloodfangs, he changed his mind. He explained that people who were not there did not believe the story, but he had seen it with his own eyes. He had been in the square that day and saw Roman Dmitri, covered in blood, dragging the leader of the Bloodfangs by the hair, a young master from a noble family who punished the leader just because he dared to lay a hand on his people. Roman Dmitri crossed into another territory just to kill the one responsible. Henderson said he could not get that scene out of his head, that he had felt chills at that moment, and that even with so many people denying what happened in Lawrence, he had witnessed everything. To him, that man was a true leader, someone who truly fought for his own people. That was why he was there, and the people around him agreed. Lucas began to understand that maybe this was what everyone was seeing. The great commotion surrounding the name Roman Dmitri did not seem to be a coincidence. The next morning, in the Dmitri training yard, everyone was gathered. Lucas thought that if everything he had heard was true, what kind of choice he should make. He still did not know. Probably many. There were also driven by the same curiosity. The moment of decision would come when they saw the real Roman Dmitri. Suddenly, the place fell into absolute silence, because everyone began to show reverence as he passed. Lucas realized that no one had given any command, yet everyone lowered their heads almost unconsciously. At that moment, he understood that the rumors were true. When Roman Dmitri stepped onto the platform, he ordered everyone to raise their heads. He explained that, as announced, he would select 30 soldiers to fight by his side. However, before starting the test, he needed to make something clear. He stated that he had no intention of spending the rest of his life stuck in a remote territory. He said he would constantly seek a greater position, and that this path would inevitably lead to battles where lives would be at stake. He declared that if anyone intended to follow him without firm determination, it would be better to leave at that moment. Those who lost their lives on the battlefield should not feel resentment for being sent there, but only regret not being able to witness the day he would rise as the most powerful man on the entire continent. Lucas thought that sounded extremely arrogant, as if he were hearing the limit of presumption. Even so, for some reason he felt that Roman Dmitri was speaking sincerely, like someone who truly believed in what he was saying. Soon after, Chris stepped forward and explained the instructions for the first test. It was something simple. When each candidate stood in their designated position, the archer positioned in front of the platform would fire 3 arrows. The arrows could pass far away, hit the board behind the candidate, or even strike them directly, potentially causing a fatal blow. Only those who did not move even a millimeter during the shots would pass the first stage. They were told to line up to begin. When the first candidate stepped up to the board, the next in line began to question whether that was really sensible, thinking it seemed insane. He tried to convince himself that the archer must be extremely extremely skilled and would not make mistakes. The first arrow passed right by the head of the man in front, and the next in line thought that must be it. A purely psychological battle. The next person in line tried to convince himself that all he had to do was relax and nothing would happen. However, suddenly, the archer struck the leg of the soldier in front, and the man screamed in pain before collapsing to the ground. Chris immediately called the soldiers and ordered them to take him to the medic. As the injured man was carried away on a stretcher, the crowd began to wonder if they could really be hit by an arrow. The man right behind him panicked at the thought that he could die if an arrow struck his head, and he gave up on the spot. Chris declared that he would officially consider the second person in line as having withdrawn. He then warned that anyone who was afraid of being hit should leave the test immediately. He reinforced his lord's words and told the crowd that if there were cowards among them, it would be better for them to leave right away. The night before, Roman Dmitri had already prepared everything. He explained to his soldiers that in the first test, the candidates would indeed be struck by arrows. He assured them that the archer was a professional and would never hit a vital area. The archer himself guaranteed that he would not make mistakes. In addition, Roman Dmitri offered a large amount of gold to the soldiers involved and ensured that medics would be ready for any situation. Even so, the fact remained the same. The candidates would be shot with arrows. Even so, all the soldiers agreed with the plan. As they left, Chris asked why his lord was going so far. Roman Dmitri replied that he would not be able to find the people he was looking for through threats alone. It was necessary to show that their lives were truly at risk. He knew that even if the chance of being hit was only 1%, most people would freeze because of that single percent of danger. He wanted someone with a strong mindset, someone with the heart of a beast. To him, people with that kind of heart were naturally stronger and faster to grow, even if they started from the bottom. Only individuals of that caliber could walk by his side. After the first man was struck in the leg, many gave up. Chris estimated that around 100 people abandoned the test at that moment. Roman Dmitri concluded that those who remained possessed the heart of a beast, something he considered an innate talent. He thought of examples like Kevin, who cut his own wrist without hesitation, or Chris, who had the courage to ask for help from someone who had humiliated him. To him, this type of person is born different. Those who do not possess this nature, no matter how strong they are, can never surpass those who have this innate disposition to do whatever it takes to become stronger. Roman Dmitri wanted only that kind of person by his side. Then he ordered the tests to continue. Lucas recognized the next candidate to be tested. It was the same man from the tavern who had spoken so confidently about how Roman Dmitri was a great leader. Now, however, he was visibly trembling. Even so, he decided that this was his chance to swear loyalty to Lord Roman Dmitri, and he chose not to give up. The first arrow passed beside his head, making his fear grow even more. The second struck near his arm. He thought that he could still back out, but he forced himself to remain still. The third arrow lodged itself between his legs. When it was over, Chris announced that Henderson had passed. He was visibly shaken at the end, but he endured until the finish. Lucas realized that if he had hesitated for just one more second, he would probably have given up. In the end, it seemed like pure luck. Thus, the first test was completed. Disregarding those who had withdrawn, around 400 candidates remained. Of these, only 120 passed. Roman Dmitri carefully evaluated those who had proven useful in that stage. Some passed while trembling in fear. Others remained completely indifferent. To him, that difference was not so important. Both had shown enough courage to overcome fear. He then declared that everyone there had proven themselves to be valid warriors. However, he made it clear that in the end, only 30 would be chosen. He announced the beginning of the second test, and explained that those who overcame it would become his subordinates and live the life of predators. Lucas did not fully understand that statement about living like predators. Soon after, Roman Dmitri explained that the second test would begin immediately and would follow the order of the line. The rules were simple. There were several wooden swords prepared for everyone, and the type or quantity did not matter. Each person could choose whatever weapon they wanted. After that, they would have to prove their worth in a duel against him. The crowd became confused and began to wonder if he really intended to fight everyone there. Roman Dmitri clarified that no one needed to defeat him. Those who managed to endure for a full minute would pass the test and receive the best conditions by his side. A bald man with a scar on his face stepped forward and introduced himself as Volka. He said that he would go first. Roman Dmitri asked if the wooden sword felt comfortable in his hands, and Volka replied that it did, without showing any hesitation. Deep down, he thought that Roman Dmitri was too confident. It was impossible to be defeated in less than a minute. At least that was what he believed. Chris picked up an hourglass and told them to get ready. Volka thought that all he had to do was endure for 1 minute to secure his place. He did not just want to pass. He wanted to make an impression, to make it clear what kind of man he was. As soon as the duel began, he advanced aggressively. However, Roman Dmitri dodged the first strike with ease. In the next movement, Volka stumbled over his own feet and was subdued almost instantly by a wooden sword pointed at him. Roman Dmitri called the next person in line. Lucas was impressed. He had never seen someone move like that. To him, that test was clearly much harder than the first. When Volka was defeated in seconds, everyone reached the same conclusion. Roman Dmitri was absurdly strong. Even so, as the duels continued and time passed, many thought that at some point he would begin to tire. After all, fighting repeatedly against so many candidates should wear him down. 1 full hour passed since the start of the second test. 60 duels had taken place, 60 defeats. Roman Dmitri remained relentless. He did not show even the slightest sign of fatigue. Henderson remembered the words spoken earlier and finally understood what it meant to live like a predator. Roman Dmitri was the true predator there. In a world where the strongest survive, a predator lives as it wishes. Looking at him, it seemed that those words words were not arrogance, but a promise. Even though he had been considered the idiot of the Dmitri family by many, that moment might be the only chance in his life to become his subordinate. Still, fear was growing among the candidates. Everyone wondered how they could face that monster. Roman Dmitri declared that if no one had the courage to step forward, they would all fail. Silence took over the training yard, until finally Lucas stepped forward. He introduced himself as the 61st candidate. When he stepped into the arena, he immediately felt that he was facing something different. The killing intent emanating from Roman Dmitri was already enough to cause fear. Even setting aside martial skill, his mere presence pressured the air around him. To Lucas, that man was completely different from the image he had in the past. He truly did not seem like someone who would rot in a remote region. He seemed like someone destined to dominate the entire continent. Lucas was not there for the 8 silver coins. He wanted to confirm with his own eyes whether Roman Dmitri's words were true. To do that, he needed to survive the test. The hourglass began to mark time. Lucas advanced without hesitation, which even surprised Chris, since no one besides the first candidate had taken the initiative to attack. He lunged forward with his sword aimed at the head while at the same time striking at the heart with a dagger. His style showed the experience of a true mercenary. Roman Dmitri stepped back slightly to avoid the dagger and blocked the sword with precision. However, Lucas quickly changed his strategy. He continued to press with the sword while throwing the dagger directly at his opponent's chest. This time, Roman Dmitri paid more attention, but still blocked everything with the arc of his blade. Lucas stepped back for a moment, realizing that it had not been enough. Normally, an opening appears when someone keeps advancing without stopping, but Roman Dmitri seemed like an impenetrable fortress. Even so, he could not stop. He knew that if he hesitated for even a single second, everything would end right there. Lucas drew another dagger and maintained the initiative, pressing forward without giving any space. Roman Dmitri realized that he was not bad at all. Maybe that style was not the most suitable for a real battlefield, but it worked well in a duel. He had instinct. He knew how to react. He knew how to improvise. Even so, Roman Dmitri had no intention of simply letting him endure for a minute. The 1-minute limit existed to show the candidates just how absurd the level of the lord they had chosen to follow truly was. The real purpose of that test was to engrave that difference in their minds from the very first encounter. The fight was starting to become interesting, and that excited Roman Dmitri, but he decided to end it. He advanced with such pressure that Lucas was forced to dodge in a hurry and ended up losing his balance, falling to the ground. A rank B mercenary had already reached the limit of what he could offer. Any ordinary person could, with effort and by risking their life repeatedly, reach rank B. However, without awakening mana, they would never step into the realm of rank A. Rank A individuals possessed power far beyond the others, and the fundamental condition for that was the awakening of mana. As he tried to get back up, Lucas felt that he had reached his limit. No matter how hard he tried, he could not surpass the barrier of rank B. Even so, he had survived until then, passing through battlefields where countless people had died. From battle to battle, he learned one simple thing: to survive and win. Any method was valid. Without hesitation, he threw sand into Roman Dmitri's eyes. It was just to endure a few more seconds. He fell, got back up again, and pulled out another dagger. However, before attacking, he noticed something that made him freeze. Roman Dmitri had his eyes open. His eyes were red from the sand, filled with tears, yet still fixed, staring directly into his soul. That unblinking intensity pierced straight through him. Lucas dropped the dagger and surrendered. It is then explained that in the demonic heavenly cult, even before teaching advanced martial arts to disciples, the first lesson is to keep their eyes open at all times during a confrontation. In an exchange of blows, a single blink can mean death. Just as there is a specific technique for breathing and circulating internal energy, the act of blinking is also trained and controlled. They are taught to keep their eyes open regardless of the situation, even if a blade is right in front of them. Faced with this, Lucas understood that there was no way to win. He surrendered completely. Chris brought some water so that Roman Dmitri could wash his eyes. Meanwhile, Lucas thought that he would never have used sand if he had known it would end like that. He had resorted to any means necessary just to endure for 1 minute and pass the test. In the end, it seemed like a pathetic result. He wondered if Roman Dmitri would be disappointed. Maybe he had not even expected anything from him. Maybe he would even be punished for fighting dirty. But Roman Dmitri simply said, for the next candidate to step forward. That left Lucas and the others completely shocked. He showed no anger, not even questioning the use of dirty tricks. Internally, Roman Dmitri had already noticed the plan from the beginning. He saw when Lucas picked up the sand while dodging, but chose not to stop him. He wanted to see him at his best. The hell that Lucas had faced throughout his life, the countless deaths he had witnessed, were beyond measure. The blood he had seen over the years could have formed an entire ocean. That was how someone close to the demonic heavenly being was forged. To Roman Dmitri, that was not dishonorable. It was simply survival. He asked if there were no more candidates, and the duels continued. The next challenger, in a moment of distraction, threw a stone at Roman Dmitri. Chris then realized that Lucas had set a precedent. From that point on, the candidates would start using any method available, and because of that, Roman Dmitri also had no reason to fight cleanly anymore. The candidate who tried to throw the stone barely had time to react. Roman Dmitri stepped in and delivered a direct kick to his face, knocking him down brutally. Lucas then realized that fighting dirty was not grounds for automatic disqualification, but from the moment that line was crossed, Roman Dmitri showed absolutely no mercy. He thought that if he had not surrendered earlier, he might have ended up in the same condition. Even so, something did not make sense to him. That was already the 100th duel. 2 hours had passed since the beginning of the second test, yet Roman Dmitri showed no sign of fatigue. There was no sweat running down his body. and his breathing remained perfectly steady. The difference lay in experience. Roman Dmitri had already seen mountains of corpses and seas of blood. In a real battle, no one spares you just because you are tired. When your breathing falters, your strikes weaken, and you become just another body in the pile of the defeated. For him, there was no option other than to fight. Inhale and exhale. With each cycle of breathing, natural mana circulated through his body, dispersing accumulated fatigue. This constant control strengthened his structure, refined his bones, and kept his body in an optimal state. There had been a time during the conquest of the Murim when he fought for 3 nights and 3 days without stopping. A sequence of duels like this was nothing in comparison. Later, Chris called all the candidates and announced that the number of people who had officially passed the second test was 0. However, that did not mean no one would be selected. 30 out of 120 would be chosen and notified later. He dismissed everyone and wished them luck. After that, Roman Dmitri handed Chris the list of those who had passed. From that moment on, it would be their responsibility to train those 30 people. Chris glanced over the list. Volka, the first to challenge, had been approved. Henderson was also among those selected. That was already somewhat surprising, but what truly intrigued him was seeing that Lucas had also passed. Chris questioned whether there was not a problem with that decision. He admitted that Lucas had enough talent as a rank B mercenary, but he pointed out that Lucas had fought dirty during the duel and had even surrendered before the end. To him, a man like that could cause problems on the battlefield. He was the type of mercenary who would abandon his companions if necessary to survive. Roman Dmitri replied that this was exactly why he had chosen him. He acknowledged that Lucas might seem like a coward without honor. However, while no one else thought of using unconventional methods, Lucas analyzed the situation realistically and acted according to his own chances. That type of person, in truth, tends to shine on the battlefield. Someone who is constantly looking for a way to survive ends up finding a way out no matter the situation. Roman Dmitri then asked how Chris could be certain that Lucas would betray his companions just because he had used sand during the duel. At that moment, he remembered something Captain Jonathan had once told him. Those who survive on the battlefield are not necessarily the ones who master aura like the two of them. They are the ones who can remain calm in the face of chaos and act according to what the situation demands. They are the ones capable of surviving. No matter how strong a knight is, there will always be the possibility of being killed by someone hidden in the shadows, simply waiting for the right moment to strike. Chris thought that in the end, Lucas' decision was realistic. His mind had been closed to any other alternative, but there was still something he wanted to ask his lord, something he had not understood until now. There were still 5 months before he would go to the battlefield, and it was not as if nobles were dragged to the front lines just because they had been recruited. Even so, he wanted to know why they were gathering soldiers now, and the answer was that it would be announced soon. The official statement from the Barco family made everything clear. They declared that they expected the Lawrences to make the right decision, stating that they still believed in the promise made in the past. However, they claimed that their honor as nobles had been betrayed, as well as the promise established between the families. After so much patience, they decided to raise their swords because to them, the sins of the Lawrences were evident. The debt left by their ancestors had not been paid, and they still had the audacity to declare that they would not give up their lands, keeping them as collateral. For that reason, they made a public declaration to the Kingdom of Cairo, informing that if the Lawrences did not pay their debts or hand over the lands declared as collateral, the Barcos, with permission from the central government, would declare a territorial war. Chris asked if that would really happen, and Roman confirmed that it would. From that moment on, preparations for the war between Barco and the Lawrences would begin. In the middle of the night, Flora woke from a nightmare, in which the blame fell upon her. In her mind, she was the one who had brought ruin to the family. The next morning, the maids were worried, as Flora had locked herself in her room since returning from the Dmitri household. Perhaps because of the broken engagement, they whispered among themselves, trying to understand what she could have done to be rejected, and they also spoke about the war against the Barco family that was about to begin. From inside, Flora simply listened and reflected. She had always believed she was intelligent. She had completed an advanced level course at the academy with good grades, and from the proud smile of her father, she had always thought she was a good daughter. But now she saw reality differently. Without her family, she was nothing. She was just a flower trapped in a greenhouse. She had called Roman an idiot like everyone else, but she began to realize that the real idiot had been herself. She no longer even had the courage to face her own father, so she began to think about what Roman would do in that situation. He was the complete opposite of her. No one depended on him or expected anything from him. Yet he had subdued the Bloodfangs with his own strength and made a bold decision for the sake of the family. She wondered when he had become strong enough to act without anyone's help. Even so, she pushed that thought away, because if he could truly solve everything on his own, it would only reinforce how useless she was. Later, one of the butlers knocked on the door with her meal. Flora took a while to respond, but she eventually opened the door and simply said she was going to the library. As she read, she knew her father was trying to gather support from other families, but she was certain no one would help them in that situation. Just as Roman had solved the Bloodfangs problem with his own hands, perhaps they too would have to find a solution on their own. While Flora studied in the library, her father faced rejection after rejection. The Martel family turned down the proposal. Then the Vastra family also refused, saying that even if they agreed to establish a distribution network, they could not get involved in the war. It soon became clear that it would be nearly impossible to secure support from neighboring regions because of the oppression of the Barcos. A servant even brought rumors that the Barcos would retaliate against anyone in the northeast who tried to interfere in the conflict. The threat was direct. If the Lawrences did not pay the debt or hand over the lands as collateral, war would be declared. expired. Only 1 week remained. In the office, Flora showed his frustration. She said that all those men who used to flatter them now pretended they did not even know them. Then Baron Lawrence asked if there had been any response from the Bank of Gold. The messenger reported that there had. They would investigate the matter of the lands given as collateral, but the process would not be completed within a week. Considering the heavy investment made in the Barcos, the bank also assessed that it would be more advantageous to support their side. After exhausting all possible alternatives, Baron Lawrence asked if there truly was no solution left. One of the men suggested that surrender might be the best option. All external support was blocked, and the difference in troops was clear. He believed that surrendering and giving the Barcos what they wanted would protect innocent soldiers and preserve at least part of their lands. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy and bleak. Baron Hansen admitted that the man had a point. However, at that moment, the doors of the office suddenly opened. Flora entered with a serious and determined expression, making it clear that she needed to speak with her father immediately. Later, Roman was also speaking with his father. He was determined to involve himself in the war between the Barcos and the Lawrences, but he would do so in the name of Roman Dimitri, not as an official representative of the family. Romero asked if he truly understood what that meant. The war between the Barcos and the Lawrences was a legitimate battle, approved by the central government. Now that the marriage with the Lawrence daughter had been broken off, there was no longer any reason to interfere in that conflict. If the Dimitris intervened, all the nobles of the Northeast could suffer the consequences together. In the worst case, the central government itself might send troops to subjugate them. He warned his son not to act on impulse, or because of a simple change of feelings. Thinking his son had matured, Romero was surprised when Roman responded by asking what he thought about the idea of starting to live on his own. Not understanding where the conversation was going, Romero questioned why he was bringing that up at that moment. It was then that Roman explained that he did not intend to get involved in the war, because of emotions. Recently, he had been threatened by Antony, the son of the Barcos, precisely because his marriage with the Lawrences was an obstacle to Antony's plans. He had no proof of what happened that day, but it was enough to awaken something within him. People said that the Dimitris were the true power of the Northeast. Even so, the Barcos acted as if they were above them, and his father remained silent. Roman knew that, with all the power and wealth they possessed, his father was satisfied with the current situation, but he was not. He wanted more power. He would not stand still while the name of the Dimitris was tarnished. To him, the Barcos were declaring war for an empty reason, something that was nothing more than a childish game to those who truly held power. In this life, Roman still felt as if he were rowing across an endless ocean. However, one thing was certain: his identity as Baekjung-hyuk had not changed. He needed to live a life of superiority and dominance. He told his father that he was not asking to use the strength of the family. He would intervene in that war solely with the qualifications of Roman Dimitri. The path he would show from that moment onward would be the path he intended to follow for his own life. Romero understood very well that no matter how great someone became, it was impossible to erase their origins. He had already told his wife that no matter how many achievements he reached, how wealthy he became, or even if he were to become a lord governing an entire territory, the fact that he had been born a commoner would never change. Liania commented that it seemed like something had happened when he went to the capital. Romero replied that nothing concrete had happened. He had simply noticed it through the looks he received. They were not the looks of nobles treating another noble as an equal. When Liana asked how he intended to change that, Romero admitted that he was satisfied with his own life. He did not want to change his path just to achieve something greater, but he wanted his children to be different. Different from him, who was content with ruling a small and remote land. He wanted them to surpass the limits imposed by their origins and achieve something far greater. That was exactly what he now saw in Roman eyes. They were the eyes of someone who could not be persuaded. Romero had always dreamed of that moment, but he had not realized when his hardworking son had grown so much. In the end, he said that Roman could do as he wished, but he should ask for help if he needed it. He told his dear son, Roman Dimitri, that no matter what he decided to do, there was no reason to carry all the responsibility alone. Later, Roman personally went to the Dimitri family forges. It was no wonder people said they were the largest in the entire kingdom of Cairo. There were several workshops lined along the street, with dozens of blacksmiths working at the same time. On that street alone, there were 30 forges operating together. Any doubt about how the Dimitris had accumulated so much wealth disappeared the moment one saw that place with their own eyes. The iron mine behind the estate held the largest deposit in the entire kingdom, and the family blacksmiths had enough skill to sell that iron at high prices. Because of that, the nobles of the Northeast did not dare to become hostile toward the Dimitris, as they depended directly on their supply of weapons and iron goods. Without them, they would face a critical problem. What they truly feared was not just influence, but wealth and control over resources. Roman was there looking for a specific man, someone who could be considered the living symbol of the Dimitri family, the master blacksmith. He had already told his father that he would handle the war with his own power, but he still needed help to equip his soldiers. Romero had told him to look for Master Hendrik, who usually handled all matters of the forge. Hendrik had worked alongside him before the family secured nobility, and later took the position of master of the family, becoming responsible for all iron production. Romero assured him that he would be able to get whatever he needed from him, but he gave an important warning. The Dimitri blacksmiths were extremely proud. They were not the type to show loyalty just because someone was born noble. They respected only those who could distinguish the quality of iron and had real skill in handling it. As Roman passed through the workshops, he felt the crooked stares of the blacksmiths. It was exactly as his father had said. Considering his own behavior in the past, even before arriving in this body, it was no surprise that they treated him that way. When he found Master Hendrik, he realized that the hostility was even more evident. The master already knew the reason for his visit. He asked if it was true that Roman needed weapons for 30 soldiers, and commented with disdain that he had thought he was there just to steal something, since he usually spent money on entertainment. He said Roman could take whatever he wanted from a corner of the workshop, as there was more than enough to arm 30 men. Roman asked if that was truly what he was offering, and whether it represented Master Hendrik's best work. The master replied harshly that the best had nothing to do with that, and that if he was not satisfied he could leave without taking anything. However, Roman stepped forward, picked up one of the swords, and examined it carefully. He remarked that perhaps the reputation of the Dimitri forges was exaggerated, because calling that material equipment fit for soldiers was pushing it too far. The provocation only made the master more irritated. Hendrik stated that the Dimitri forges took pride in having the highest quality in the entire kingdom, but someone who had never sweated in front of a suffocating forge had no right to judge them. He said that if it were not for Baron Romero's request, he would not have set anything aside for him at all. While his younger brother Rodwell had spent years working hard to one day succeed the family, Roman, as the eldest, had wasted his days courting women in the streets. Compared even to the weapons thrown on the ground, he was nothing more than true trash. Even in the face of the insult, Roman remained calm. He said he understood the master's anger, but pointed out that the sword had been hammered with disproportionate force during the process, to the point that it had slightly changed color when exposed to sunlight. That indicated the work of an inexperienced blacksmith who had made serious mistakes while forging the metal. Because of that, it could not be called Dimitri ironwork. He did not deny the pride of the family, but he refused to pretend that it was worthy of carrying their name. Then he went straight to the point. A soldier could die because of that sword. The dull edge would not make a clean cut through flesh, and when it got stuck in the enemy muscle, the soldier would waste time trying to pull it free, and would end up being beheaded. He asked Master Hendrik what he thought of that injustice. The soldier would give everything to survive, but would end up dying not because of a lack of courage, but because of the inferior quality of the weapon given to him. Roman asked why they thought soldiers wore armor. If no one realized that those weapons scattered across the ground were garbage, then the soldiers who followed him would be placing their lives in the hands of poorly made iron, without even knowing it. That was not a simple act of retaliation against him, driven by personal feelings. The lives of 30 men were at stake. Even knowing that, Hendrik had chosen to remain silent in the face of the truth. Roman questioned whether he could truly, with pride, call himself a master craftsman who represented the Dimitri family, after trying to deliver that garbage out of personal resentment. People who had done nothing could die because of it. Hendrik replied that it had not been his intention, but Roman made it clear that intention did not matter. The purpose of weapons and armor was simple. He had made the request in the name of Baron Romero, his father, and in response he had received unworthy equipment. He then asked whether that attitude could be interpreted as insubordination against the lord of that land. Hierarchy was a clear concept. The moment the boundaries between lord and retainer became ambiguous, the hierarchy itself collapsed. Retainers could not act as if they were equal to their lord just because of proximity or familiarity. When they crossed that line, they had to be held accountable. Roman asked once again whether that could be considered insubordination. Hendrik replied that no, it was not insubordination. Then Roman demanded an explanation. He asked why he had tried to deliver that piece of poorly made iron. The argument drew the attention of the other blacksmiths, who began to gather around. Some asked what that bastard was doing with Master Hendrik. Others commented that they saw Roman Dimitri challenging the master while holding a sword, as if he were threatening him. Before the situation could worsen, Hendrik ordered everyone to stop. He took responsibility and apologized to Roman. At that moment, something from his past came to his mind. He remembered his youth, when he had forged a poor sword and received a severe scolding from his own master. At the time, he had been told that he could not be at ease until he was capable of properly doing what he was ordered to do. They said it was too early for him to try forging his own sword, and told him to throw that piece of trash away immediately. If he intended to keep making that kind of garbage, it would be better not to return to the forge at all. Back then, he had been furious. He thought his master barely taught him anything, only made him work all day, and still punished him for the smallest mistakes. He believed he would never become a good blacksmith that way. However, during that same period, a commotion occurred inside the forge. A simple man appeared before them, saying that he knew the coin he brought was not enough to buy a sword, but it was everything he had. He promised that he would return to pay double. For someone like Roman, who had nothing but a healthy body, he needed a weapon to be able to support himself. The blacksmith said that if his intention was just to go around from shop to shop, then he should do it somewhere else. Roman begged, saying he had a family to feed, but the blacksmith still drove him away. As he walked out of the city, Hendrik approached him and handed over the sword he had forged himself. He gave the sword for free to that warrior, and in that moment, he felt good about his own actions. He believed he had done a good deed. However, later he found that man dead. He was shocked to discover that he had died while escorting a merchant, because the sword had broken in the middle of a fight against bandits. From that day on, Hendrik began to believe that he had been responsible for that man's death. He promised that he would never allow something like that to happen again. Even so, he had almost repeated the same mistake simply because he did not like Roman. When confronted, he said that he would pay for his mistakes with his own actions. Roman replied that if he was willing to take responsibility, then he would not pursue the matter further. He threw the sword away and said they would return to business. Roman knew that Hendrik was the best master blacksmith there. Because of that, he decided to trust him to create the equipment for his soldiers. As he had said before, he did not believe Hendrik had been trying to disobey his father on purpose. He wanted to bury that conflict and move forward. All he needed were swords and armor that would would protect the lives of his men. Nothing more than that. Hendrik was surprised and began to wonder if that boy was giving him a chance. He had heard rumors about Roman, but he could not understand how someone could change so much. He no longer seemed like the same person as before. So he said that he regretted everything that had happened and promised that it would not happen again. As a form of apology, he guaranteed that the weapons and armor would be of the highest possible quality. The work began immediately. Hendrik and his blacksmiths returned to the intense routine of the forge. Later, one of the blacksmiths, while working, told Roman that he had once stolen one of Hendrik's swords in the past. It was no surprise that he did not remember, because on that day he had been drunk, as usual at that time. It had happened 3 years ago, when the Lord had cut off his allowance and he had become desperate for money. He broke into the forge and stole the master sword to sell it in the market for a ridiculous price. That sword had been Hendrik's masterpiece. He had spent 6 months just developing its design, and another 3 months to finish it. It was something made with his own hands, with pride and dedication. Seeing it being sold like that, without even finding its true owner, was something he had never been able to accept. Upon hearing that, Roman realized that he had truly gone too far in the past. Later, Hendrik approached and said that he had already forgiven him for that matter. He explained that he accepted the request, not because he was in need, but because he could not accept that the eldest son of the Dmitri family would be negligent with something as important as the forge. He reminded him that the foundation of that family had always been the work of the forge. He said that the day Roman forged a poor sword with his own hands, he might better understand the weight of that. Roman replied that that day would not take long to arrive. After that, he said he would take his leave for now and return when everything was ready. Later, Roman returned to the workshop where he used to train alone. The place was clean and organized exactly as he had ordered. The tools were in place, the anvil properly positioned, and the furnace ready for use. He lit the fire and began the process. When he turned 18 in the Murim, he decided to forge his own sword. At that time, the successor of the demonic cult had not yet been chosen, and the rivalry among the brothers was constant. He needed to sleep with one eye open, always alert to any attempt at assassination. His 11th brother, Shang Yun, ambushed him while he was living a rare moment of peace. The battle was intense. His treasured sword ended up breaking in the middle of the fight, unable to withstand his brother attacks. Even so, he managed to win, injured and on the verge of death. As he mutilated Shang Yun's face with the broken blade, he thought that he needed a sword that would never break, a weapon that could withstand his full physical potential without failing. He understood that he needed a sword made exclusively for himself. After that day, unlike his brothers, he began visiting blacksmiths and learning the craft. After each decisive battle, he forged a new sword, adjusted to his current self, stronger and more experienced. After countless battles, his swords continued to evolve. The 39th sword he created became known as the Heavenly Demon Sword, a priceless treasure. Now, with the war approaching, he knew it was time to create a sword for his new self. Roman began the process by flattening the first sheet of metal. He struck once, then again, and continued hammering, repeating the same movement with controlled rhythm and strength. Every strike had intention. Every impact shaped not only the metal but also his own determination. When someone focuses completely on a single objective, the world around them seems to disappear. Roman entered a trance, focused only on the sound of the hammer against the metal and on the birth of a new blade. He had to survive in a world where only the strongest remained because he was the son of the heavenly demon. From an early age, he understood that he would not have an easy life, and over time he came to be called the strongest after overcoming countless challenges placed before him. He never saw that as something bad, and he saw it no differently now. He simply accepted the new reality and remained firm within it. Even so, he knew that the level he was at was still not high enough to face any unexpected variable. That was why he needed to train and become stronger. There were powerful forces in Roman world, and he did not yet know them all. But one thing was certain: defeat would not be tolerated. As he hammered the metal in the forge, he was not just shaping a sword, he was using the infernal divine art, drawing in the flames and manipulating fire, like someone who had once been called the flame demon. This technique used the power of blazing fire to rapidly accumulate mana, making it ideal for his current state, which he considered insufficient. As long as he remained close to the flames, he could generate almost infinite mana to continue forging. He knew that his lungs could be damaged if he overdid it, but he was willing to pay that price. He wanted power capable of facing any variable that might arise. Meanwhile, Flora spoke with her father about the situation of the war. She explained that they were at a deadlock. Support from surrounding regions had been restricted, and the military gap was clear. Some were already discussing the possibility of surrender in exchange for keeping part of the territory, but Flora believed that this should not be done under any circumstances. The Baron argued that instead of losing the lives of innocent soldiers in a seemingly lost war, surrender might be the better option. The Berko family had used their connections with the central government to secure a loan from the Bank of Gold, and the amount had been released without any collateral. Flora replied that a loan without collateral certainly came with extremely high interest. That war would not truly benefit the Barkos. The Bank of Gold had lent the money aiming for future returns, and both sides would profit while that land was destroyed with the Lawrences still there. The Baron then asked what she suggested as an alternative. She said there was only one possible path: a desperate resistance. For a moment, the Baron believed Flora would present an extraordinary strategy, something out of the ordinary, but she was speaking about the basics, about what needed to be done. He asked whether closing the castle gates would be enough to survive. Flora explained that it was not just about resisting behind walls. They needed to abandon everything they had produced that year and burn their own fields, stockpile as much food as possible, and endure until winter arrived. The Baron questioned whether she truly believed that that holding out until winter would solve anything. Flora explained that even if the Barancos had obtained a large sum of money through the central government, it had limits. The interest would continue to grow over time, and the massive influence of the Bank of Gold spread across the entire continent. If the war dragged on, the Baranco family would begin to be crushed by their own interest. In addition, mercenaries fought only for money, and the money came from the bank. Once the siege stopped being profitable, their resources would run out. The Baron and the nobles were shocked by the analysis, but they acknowledged that it was possible. It would be a battle of endurance. The Baron thought that after the incident with the Dimitri, he had believed he was raising an immature daughter. Now he realized that Flora had grown a lot. In front of everyone, he declared that Flora was right. He ordered that preparations for a desperate resistance begin immediately. They would do everything possible to hold out until the end, to keep the Lawrence bloodline alive. Even if the castle walls collapsed and they perished, they would continue to resist and fight until the very last moment. While everyone worked to set up that desperate strategy, Roman was finishing his sword. He left the isolated room, holding the first blade he had forged in that world. The sword was perfect for his current state, balanced, durable, and tailored to his own combat rhythm. He decided that the name should also come from that world, so he called it Salamander. Shortly after, a messenger from the Barco family appeared in the Lawrence territory to threaten them. He announced that there was a second option besides total surrender, a war with all resources involved, a clean battle in an open field supervised by a judge from the central government. They could also choose a duel between two warriors, with the method defined by the Lawrence themselves. The decision would be up to them. Baron Lawrence replied that he did not trust the Barco, nor the justifications presented. The document claiming an ancestral debt was forged. In addition, he had no intention of sacrificing the life of any family member in a manipulated game. The messenger then presented the third option, abandoning their pride as members of royalty and continuing the desperate resistance within the castle walls. He said that from that moment on, the Barco family would respect the Baron's decision, declaring that all the blood shed during the siege would be his responsibility. The soldiers were terrified. Baron Lawrence was also surprised, because the messenger had not come alone. He was accompanied by Barco troops, who had already begun the siege. The war had started even before any formal response. The Lawrence were forced to defend the walls with arrows and all the strength they had. Despite the pressure, the Barco advance was more difficult than expected. Later, the Barco commander grew irritated as he realized that even with 3 times more soldiers than the Lawrence, the pace of the battle did not match his expectations. A subordinate reported that the Lawrence had already completed all preparations. They had dug a deep moat to restrict access to the walls, and from the constant volume of arrows fired since the beginning, it seemed they had more than enough supplies to sustain the siege. The commander could not understand how all of that had been done in just 1 week. According to his calculations, the Lawrence should have surrendered to preserve as much land as possible. Instead, they were locked behind their gates, risking their own extinction. He began to wonder where he had gone wrong in his strategy. When a knight asked what they should do, he answered that they should prepare to use the special weapon. He believed that Baron Lawrence was a weak man, someone who had already sold his own daughter to the Dimitri because he could not withstand the pressure. To him, the Baron was the type who yielded in times of crisis. Inside the castle, Baron Lawrence commanded the defense with firmness. He repositioned troops, organized resupplies, and acknowledged that Flora had been right. The Barco had retreated for now. He asked how she had come up with that strategy, and Flora, already wearing armor, replied that she had simply realized she needed to become stronger to protect her family. Suddenly, a massive explosion struck the wall. The enemies were using a flare, a catapult capable of launching massive magical explosions against the castle walls. Each shot cost dozens of gold coins, and since it was a strategic weapon, it could only be used with permission from the central government. Regardless of wealth, it was not something easy to obtain. Flora could not believe that the Barco had enough connections to rent such a weapon. There were only 2 ways to block a flare shot: counterattack with a magical weapon of the same level, or leave the castle to destroy it. Both options were practically impossible for them at that moment. Then a maid approached, informing them that they had received a magical call. The message came from Roman Dimitri, who said he had a way to help. Flora accepted the transmission and asked what he intended to do to save the Lawrence. Roman replied directly that he wanted to take revenge on the Barco family for personal reasons, a decision he had already made. If the Lawrence followed his plan, he would advance immediately and destroy the Barco together with them. She asked what the role of her family would be in the plan. Roman explained that it was simple. They would need to prepare the stage first by making an initial sacrifice. In return, he would officially intervene in the name of Roman Dimitri. Flora realized that he was proposing this, knowing they had very few options. Even so, she replied that she accepted, as long as her family was protected. Roman added that he needed a legitimate cause to get involved in the war. Since the marriage between them had been broken, he needed a plausible reason to enter the conflict, so he asked Flora to declare that Anthony Barco had crossed the line with her, and that she had been forced to break off the marriage because of it. This would completely destroy Flora's aristocratic value. Her title and reputation as a daughter of the Lawrence would be stained. However, if she gave up those privileges, she could offer offer him the justification he needed to enter the war. Roman made it clear that it was all he needed. If she claimed that Anthony Barco had crossed the line even before the official separation, she would be considered part of the Dimitri in the eyes of the world, and he never forgave those who dared to touch what was his. Flora looked toward the castle wall and saw her people being obliterated. Soldiers were blown apart by the flare strikes, bodies thrown into the air, and stones shattering under the impact of magical explosions. At that moment, she no longer thought about title, reputation, or pride. She only thought about the people who were dying. So she answered yes, that she would fulfill any condition Roman imposed. She asked him to exterminate every single one of the cursed Barco. The enemies continued advancing and were already beginning to climb the walls. An assassin appeared beside Baron Lawrence, ready to strike him, but Flora reacted first and brought him down with a precise arrow. Soon after, she told her father that they needed to open the gates and face the Barco head-on. The Baron asked what she was talking about, and she quickly explained that Roman Dimitri had promised to help them. If they could distract the enemies long enough, Roman would advance with his soldiers to destroy the flare. Baron Lawrence questioned why Roman would do such a thing, but Flora did not have time to explain every detail. She simply stated that Roman Dimitri always kept his word. Meanwhile, Roman remained still in front of the communication crystal, watching in silence. Chris asked if they should attack immediately. Roman answered that not yet. Chris insisted, saying it could be too late if they did not move now. The flare was capable of destroying entire walls, and they needed to act. Roman then asked why he should rush. The fall of the Lawrence was not something important to him. He preferred the death of hundreds of strangers over risking the life of a single one of his soldiers. There would be many casualties among the Lawrence, and part of that would be the consequence of following an incapable lord. Unlike them, he would not force his men into a losing battle. Chris said he understood. Shortly after, the Lawrence truly opened the gates and advanced against the Barco. The enemy commander, while mutilating warriors on the field, commented that they still had not realized their place. He was the commander of the Berja mercenary company. Some of the Lawrence soldiers began to retreat in fear, but Flora shouted for them not to fall back. She knew that if they did not serve as bait, Roman would not appear. It did not take long for the mercenaries to be caught off guard by the approach of Roman and his soldiers. The moment to risk their lives arrived sooner than expected. There was uncertainty and anxiety in the eyes of the men, because they knew that battle could be fatal. Those who survived as Roman soldiers promised to live as predators, but in the end, what determined survival was willpower. Before advancing, Roman made it clear that the priority was to attack the rear of the Barco and destroy the siege weapon. He did not expect much from the Lawrence as bait, and also did not fully trust their performance. Because of that, he would take the vanguard alone. He would open the path by massacring the enemies ahead, and his soldiers would only need to follow him and eliminate those who remained. But they must not forget that the highest priority was to destroy the flare. The Barco commander saw the approach and asked if they really believed they could defeat them with that number of men. He ordered the soldiers to prepare and deal with those crazy intruders. They formed a front line with shields and spears, but Roman advanced mounted and leaped over the formation, bringing down the entire line in an instant. In his past life, there was a saying within the Orthodox demonic sect that the heavenly demon would always stand at the forefront of the cult. He was invincible. Facing him head-on was practically suicide. Many wondered why someone so powerful would choose to occupy the most dangerous position on the battlefield. The answer had always been simple. The strongest must be the first to break the enemy's morale. As they faced Roman, the Barco frontline soldiers felt as if they were standing before a demon. He advanced, declaring that if they would not come to him, then he would go to them himself. Meanwhile, his soldiers followed behind, cutting down the remaining enemies. Chris tensed when he saw Kevin being attacked and his horse killed beneath him. Even so, Kevin did not hesitate. Instead of retreating in fear, he drew his dagger and drove it into the enemy soldier's neck. He knew he had to do everything for his lord, no matter the cost. At the same time, Chris pushed himself to grow stronger, because he wanted to become someone capable of following Roman to the end. Using his sword aura, he advanced across the battlefield and easily cut down the soldiers who crossed his path. The Barco front line tried to stop that advancing monster, but Roman had no intention of slowing down. His objective was clear. He headed straight toward the flare, the enemy's magical siege weapon. On the other side, Berja, captain of the Berja mercenary company, watched the scene closely. He wondered if that young man was truly Roman Dimitri. He knew there was an enormous reward tied to that mission, and that the future of his company was on the line. Because of that, he decided to face the enemy himself. He crossed swords with Roman. Berja was recognized in the kingdom as a rank A mercenary. Unlike rank B, one could only reach rank A by mastering aura. He was a 2-star aura knight. Even so, when he pressed his blade against Roman's salamander, he did not feel that he was causing any real impact. The counterattack came in an extremely fast strike. Berja stepped back in shock, trying to defend himself, realizing that his opponent was far stronger than he had imagined. In just a few seconds, around 5, Roman tore the head off a rank A mercenary who had dominated the battlefield. The mercenaries were left in complete shock. Roman's soldiers were filled with morale. The Barco commander shouted for them to kill that bastard immediately, but some soldiers warned that they needed to protect the commander first. Meanwhile, Roman turned his gaze toward the flare. He realized that the weapon was the result of a kind of magic that did not exist in the world of Morin, but that did not matter. He activated the divine art of the heavenly demon and executed the demon sword technique, first form. The strike that followed was intense and precise, a clean cut wrapped in darkness that split the flare in half and destroyed its magical circle. After that, Roman declared for the Lawrence to listen well. He, Roman Dimitri, had destroyed the Barco siege weapon. The soldiers celebrated and gained renewed motivation. Flora watched in shock, realizing that he had truly succeeded. With the destruction of the flare, the Barco had no choice but to retreat. During the battle, Chris began to use his aura differently. He tried to condense it as much as possible, just as Roman did. As a result, his mana consumption decreased even under intense pressure. Before, he had been ridiculed for following Roman's method, but now he was beginning to realize that his lord's path was the correct one. By his side, he was growing. He also noticed that his allies were exhausted, but none of the 30 soldiers had been left behind. None had suffered serious injuries. That was why they had been chosen. They all thought the same thing. There was only one reason they had remained alive and safe: the monster leading from the front, Roman Dmitri. After the victory, Roman told his men that they had done well to survive, and that their job there was finished. When they returned to Lawrence, they were received as heroes. Inside the castle, Roman was acclaimed. Baron Lawrence realized that it was truly a shame that things had unfolded the way they had in the past. From their very first meeting, he had noticed that Roman was special. The fact that he had destroyed the flare alone was proof of astonishing talent. Dmitri had raised a true tiger. If fate had been different, that tiger could have been his son-in-law. But the past could no longer be changed. The Baron extended his hand and said he was glad to see him again. They greeted each other in a diplomatic manner. Later, in the private chambers, Flora personally thanked Roman. She acknowledged that they had not managed to act as bait in the ideal way, but even so, he had helped without hesitation. She thanked him sincerely. Roman replied that he had only fulfilled his part of the agreement, and that the Lawrence had acted exactly as he expected. Even so, Flora insisted that she wanted to repay the favor. As a representative of the Lawrence family, she felt she needed to offer something in return. She said that if there was anything he desired, he only had to say it. She would stand on his side and ensure he received whatever he asked for, no matter what happened. Roman answered that if she truly wanted to repay him, he would not refuse. After that, they went together to the conference room. Later, Roman was seated beside Baron Lawrence, Flora, and the other nobles of the family. They discussed that this was an opportunity. If they ended the conflict at that moment, it might be possible to accept a diplomatic solution. The Barco still had many soldiers, and continuing the war could bring unnecessary risks. Perhaps it was time to consider diplomacy as the next step. Roman thought that all the Lawrence were merely herbivores, people who always backed down under pressure. The Baron ended up agreeing with the opinion of the nobles. Even though they had managed to stop the attack thanks to Roman's help, there was a limit to how long they could hold back the Barco. They could even send a message immediately to try to negotiate, but Roman asked to intervene. Everyone fell silent to hear what he had to say. He stood up and explained that Barco was under enormous financial pressure. To pay off the absurd debt from the loan, they had no choice but to take Lawrence. That would not change even if the port were destroyed. He stated that if they sent a messenger now, they would probably receive only his head in return. Outside, soldiers were still carrying bodies. Roman asked if no one felt disturbed by seeing such a catastrophic scene. To him, Barco could not be forgiven. They needed to show the world how they would take revenge on those brutes who had dared to lay their hands on Lawrence. The Baron replied that it was not as if they did not understand the situation, but faced with such overwhelming force, there was nothing they could do. Roman looked at the Baron with the eyes of a predator and stated that there was only one path. He knew that herbivores, when cornered, had no choice but to become prey. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the Barco commander was furious, questioning why Roman Dmitri had interfered and made everything even more unfavorable. For Roman, there was no option other than a decisive combat. He said exactly that to the Baron. They should hold a warrior's battle, a duel between representatives of the two families to determine the winner. Up to 3 swordsmen could participate on each side. Following a sacred ritual, the authority of the host had to be impartial, and the central government would send a judge as soon as both sides reached an agreement. The fight would only begin when the judge gave the command. The Baron was taken aback. It had been a long time since he had heard of that kind of battle. The opponent would be Barco, who had connections with the central government and a massive debt involved. It was impossible to predict what kind of master they would invite to fight. Roman said he understood the concern, and stated that from that moment on, he would guarantee victory with absolute conviction. The Baron asked if he was truly certain. Roman replied that if there was confidence in victory, there was no better option than a warrior's battle. Barco had a 3-star knight who would likely fight first, therefore he himself would represent the Lawrence as the first warrior. It did not matter whether he faced the Barco knight or an external master. He guaranteed that he would win. Even so, Roman explained that there was no point in winning one fight and losing 2. The third battle would be in the hands of his subordinate, Chris, a 2-star knight with genius-level talent, someone capable of defeating even a 3-star opponent. He asked if they did not agree that in this way the advantage would be on their side. If they won the warrior's battle, they would be able to restore the reputation of the Lawrence. He then turned to Flora and asked what decision she would make. She remembered the favor she had promised him and understood what was being suggested. Roman was offering himself as a warrior to ensure that the Lawrence could handle any unexpected variable. She realized that he was a truly dangerous man and declared that she supported holding the warrior's battle. With both sides agreeing, the duel was decided. The message was sent, and 1 week later the duel was organized. On the appointed day, the judge introduced himself as Count Artes. He declared that the warrior's battle was a sacred event, blessed by Valhalla. Regardless of the outcome, both sides had to honor the oath. Anyone who violated the rules would put the honor of the Cairo kingdom at risk and would be judged for it. Now both sides needed to designate 3 warriors who would represent their lands. Later, the Barco commander was already laughing calmly, drinking wine at the table and chatting as if nothing was happening. At that moment, Roman commented that they would probably need to change the order of the warriors. Baron Lawrence found it strange and asked why, since that had been decided a week earlier. Roman explained that this was exactly the problem. The more time passed, the more Barco felt the pressure of the loan interest. They were deliberately delaying, yet they did not seem anxious at all. They were casually talking with representatives of the central government, as if they were old friends. The Baron remarked that they must have hired a very strong external master. When Roman looked toward the Barco side, he saw one of the knights sleeping in his chair, yet he still analyzed him coldly. Baron Lawrence asked what exactly he intended to change. The original plan was for Roman to secure the first victory, then a Lawrence knight would enter, and finally Chris would finish. But Roman stated that it would be the opposite. Chris would go first. Both the Baron and Flora were shocked. Then Roman said that he would enter right after to face the card that Barco had prepared. He decided to change the plan into one of total domination. The moment for the first match arrived. Chris stood face to face with Janssen, a 3-star knight. Many recognized Chris as Jonathan's disciple, but he was still only 2 stars. Most people did not have much faith in him. Even so, Chris believed that risks had to be taken for someone to grow stronger. That was why he had stepped out of his comfort zone to follow his lord. The judge signaled the start of the match. As expected from a 3-star knight, Janssen's first strike was devastating and extremely fast. However, Chris dodged. He remembered what he had realized when fighting Roman. No matter how strong the aura is, it only matters if it hits the opponent. Chris was fast. He moved from side to side with short and precise steps, without wasting motion. He knew he needed to find a single opportunity. Janssen advanced again, irritated, determined to finish it using his massive 3-star aura. This time, Chris realized that he could not simply dodge. He remembered Roman's teachings and understood that he needed to move away from the common logic of that world. A reckless release of mana did not reflect the enemy's full strength. He also recalled how his lord demonstrated power with a minimal amount of mana. Then he focused his aura into a single line, concentrating everything at one point of the blade. At the right moment, he unleashed his decisive strike. The duel ended there. Janssen was decapitated. The crowd shouted Chris's name, while many stood in complete shock. Chris himself could barely believe that he had defeated a 3-star knight. Roman, with a faint smile, simply signaled for the next to enter. The Barco commander had not expected that defeat. He had planned to end everything in the second match, but now the third had become the most important. Even so, he did not seem worried. He had a hidden card, something that would make up for all the fortune invested. Soon, a mercenary stood up and walked toward the arena. He introduced himself as Homeros of Barco, a 4-star knight. The shock was immediate. Many could hardly believe that Homolus was there. He was known as a wanderer, a ranker, one of the most powerful on the continent. He held position 49 in the continental ranking. He had only agreed to participate at the request of the guildmaster. The rankers originated from the Valhalla Empire, from that great sacred hall where the results of battles were recorded and the names of the strong were immortalized. Over time, the 100 rankers came to be chosen by the Temple of Valhalla, becoming the ultimate symbol of strength on the continent. Baron Lawrence was terrified. There was no one in Cairo who did not know Homeros, the wandering swordsman, famous for roaming the kingdom, challenging the strongest. In the crowd, people commented that he had already defeated the ranker 30 and had recently reached 4 stars. Roman, upon realizing this, understood that this was Barco's true trump card. For the first time, he felt something close to anticipation. Just as his opponent was hiding his true strength, no one there knew exactly how strong Roman was either. To him, this was the opportunity to face a truly powerful opponent, someone of a level that had previously only existed in books. Flora grabbed Roman and asked if he had gone mad. The opponent was Homeros, rank 49 on the continent, someone strong enough to compete for a position near rank 30. She questioned whether he really thought he could challenge a ranker, and said that at the very least he should pray to win the next fight. When Homeros looked at Roman, he realized that the man in front of him was also a predator. Flora insisted that this was the moment to deal with the unexpected variable, that they could send another knight, and that there was no reason for him to risk his life in a lost battle. But Roman simply pushed her aside, saying he did not need to explain anything to her, and telling her not to get in his way. He stepped into the arena and introduced himself as one of the representatives of Lawrence in that battle, Roman Dimitri. Then he drew his sword, the salamander. Homeros thought that if that man had enough skill to destroy a flare, then he should at least be a high-level knight, but he still did not believe he would need to face someone he considered inferior, especially when he intended to soon compete for a place among the top 30 rankers. When the duel began, Homeros decided to end it quickly. His advance was extremely fast, like a blur, and a radiant strike hit the salamander. However, that was not a real attack, it was just a feint. He tried to strike from behind Roman, finding the opponent interesting for having reacted to his initial move. As they exchanged blows, Homeros asked what kind of technique he was using. Roman, on the other hand, had been waiting for a decent battle for a long time, but he could tell that the enemy was still underestimating him. Then Homeros activated his 3rd star in an extreme form, saying he would fight with more power because he found him interesting. His aura expanded with such force that it pushed people in the audience back. Faced with that pressure, Roman thought that if this was rank 49, then it was a disappointment. There was no reason to prolong the fight. He was not affected by Homeros's aura. On the contrary, he advanced with slow and steady steps, telling his opponent to block it if he could. Then he invoked his demonic technique, imbuing the sword with darkness. Homeros found himself facing a dark wave, as if he were inside a black and white space. The mana there manifested in a way he had never seen before, as if time itself had stopped. Unable to react, he received a blow directly. Roman executed the celestial demonic art. 3rd movement, blackout. His hair returned to black as the strike was completed. Homeros had accepted that that mission at the request of his guild leader, merely to take sides in a dispute between two distant families. He had been refusing many missions since earning the title of rank A mercenary, but he could not refuse that invitation. Now, however, he was dead. The star of Cairo, who had risen through the ranks before even reaching full 4 stars, had fallen. Roman thought that the man who had not even reached the top was far too arrogant. The standards of that world could not compare to those of his past life. In Murium, it was like a galaxy filled with martial masters, each more powerful than the other. There, only death awaited the careless. To him, the way people of that world thought was insignificant. He asked the judge to announce the result. The judge, still in shock, declared that the winner of the second round was Roman Dimitri of Lawrence. The crowd wondered whether Homifle was really dead. Chris, watching everything, thought that this was the true strength of his lord. He questioned whether Roman had already possessed all that power in their first duel, or if he had grown that much in the meantime. Back then, would he have had the strength to defeat Homiflace? After defeating Janssen, Chris had once thought he might surpass his lord one day, but now he realized how foolish that was. With that victory, Lawrence had technically already won the battle of warriors. There was no longer any need to shed blood. The families had the right to adjust the order of the fighters, but the judge declared that they still needed to complete the third match. As it was a sacred ritual, both families could discuss and then send their final warriors to officially conclude the battle. The commander of Parkour could not understand how Homeros had lost. He was a 4-star knight, far above the average warriors of that place. He even wondered if they had sent him a fake Homeros, because none of it made any sense. His right hand suggested sending another warrior, but he replied that he did not want to lose any more important strength, and ordered them to send Benson. Benson was the same starless knight who had taken a few slaps from Roman after abusing Kevin. Even so, he was the one chosen by Barco. Most people did not even recognize him, since he was practically unknown in the arena. When Kevin saw that he would be the next opponent, he asked his lord for the chance to face him. His eyes were determined. Roman looked at him in silence, thinking that in a world where the strongest survives, the only fate of a loser is death. Even as a starless knight, Benson was still dangerous for someone like Kevin. Perhaps the boy wanted to prove that he was strong enough to stand by Roman's side. In the end, he allowed it. Kevin stated that he would return in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Benson was terrified. He wondered how he had ended up in that situation. His father was also a knight. He had joined Barco, an influential family, and had a promising future. Now, he was being sent to die. However, when he saw his opponent just a boy, he thought that God was showing him mercy. He could not hold back his laughter and mocked him, believing that luck had turned in his favor. To him, 2 abandoned people were facing each other there, but Kevin replied that he was nothing more than a sword that protects his lord. The arrogance irritated Benson, who launched into the attack with much more powerful strikes. The difference in strength was clear. Even so, Kevin was dangerous. In an opening, he almost drove his blade into Benson's neck, but in return he received a brutal kick that knocked him down and made him cough up blood. Chris, watching, knew that the difference between them was enormous, and wondered what Roman was thinking by sending Kevin into what looked like a death sentence. The fight continued, and Kevin was being crushed by Benson's blows. He could barely counterattack. However, something began to awaken inside him. Bloodlust took over his body. He needed revenge. He remembered what his lord had done during the illusion, when he cut his hand and allowed the demonic spirit art to seep into his mind, dragging a demon into him. Kevin released that demon. His instincts became extremely sharp. He turned almost into a beast. The voice inside his head screamed, saying that his head had almost been split open, and that he would make the enemy pay. He wanted to become a useful sword for his lord, even more useful than Chris. A storm of emotions took over him. For the first time, he used the demonic spirit art. His aura exploded like that of a demon. His sword pierced through Benson's armor. Even as he took hits, he felt no pain, or simply did not care. He completely lost control. Benson fell into despair, but was pierced by the blade. Kevin kept striking, again and again, until blood painted the entire arena. After some time, all that remained was a rain of blood. He stepped down from the arena, knelt before Roman, and declared that he had returned with victory. Roman simply replied that he had done an excellent job. Kevin smiled innocently. The battle of warriors between Lawrence and Barco ended with 3 victories in 3 matches. It was a crushing victory for Lawrence, and at the center of it all was Roman Dimitri. Like any legend, rumors began to spread, mixing lies and truth. People all across the continent began to talk about him. In taverns, they said that Barco had been completely defeated by Roman and his powerful knights. They said he was the savior of Lawrence, that he had slaughtered hundreds of enemy soldiers alone from the rear and destroyed the flare with a single strike. If Roman had not been there, Lawrence would have been annihilated. He began to be called a hero. Children started playing, pretending to be the hero Roman Dimitri of Lawrence, and little by little, he began to accumulate heroic legends, one after another. Sometime later, in Barco's castle, the regent was in despair. He thought everything was over. There were still the main interests owed to the Golden Bank, as well as the compensation promised to the mercenary guild. In practice, they were bankrupt. He remembered that after they had once knelt before Barco, which was considered one of the most powerful houses in the north, now the nobles themselves pretended they did not even exist. If Roman Dimitri had not interfered, none of this would have happened. In his eyes, the blame was entirely that bastard's. Roman had done something that should never be done within the aristocracy. Even so, the regent still had one last option, the final chance to save the Barco family. A few days later, he called a meeting with several nobles. Before it began, he thanked the true nobles who had come to Barco. However, those present wanted to get straight to the point. The regent was direct. He said that within the aristocracy, every war needed a valid cause. Lawrence. Barco's attack against Lawrence had a recognized justification. The goal was to make Lawrence pay for the decisions of its ancestors, and even the central government had considered it a legitimate cause. But Roman Dmitri had interfered in that war without presenting any valid reason. Because of that ambush, Barco lost the flair. In addition, among the combatants who took part, there was not even a single warrior formally designated by Lawrence in the first strike. That made no sense. What was Roman Dmitri's reason for helping Lawrence? If the two families were still united by marriage, there might have been some justification. However, everyone knew that Roman and Flora had cancelled the arrangement. At that moment, he was nothing more than a stranger to Lawrence. Therefore, there was no legitimate reason for that interference. The regent argued that Roman's actions had crossed every limit. Some nobles, who already had an interest in harming the Dmitri family, immediately agreed. They said it was true, that Roman Dmitri had presented no reason at all. The regent thought that was already enough. If he could force the Dmitri family to take responsibility and pay compensation, perhaps he could still resolve the issue with the Golden Bank and the Mercenary Guild. Then Roman stormed into the meeting. He entered saying that everyone there had gathered to talk about him. Had they not, he had heard that there were many complaints about his name and decided to come in person. He wanted to hear and respond directly to the Viscount of Barco. Before that, when he told Chris that he was going to Barco, Chris warned him that it was almost suicide. From his perspective, the Viscount would see him as a mortal enemy. It might be better to avoid Barco as much as possible. Roman replied that if he had not started this, he might have ignored it, but now that he had taken the first step, he would go to the end. The resentment against him was obvious, and Barco was at its most critical moment. It was the perfect time to extinguish that spark of revenge before it turned into a fire. Then he mounted his horse and went alone to the meeting. When he entered the hall, the Viscount of Barco was furious. That brat from the Dmitri barony, who had not even officially inherited the title, dared to step in there, ignoring the difference in status between them. The Viscount said that since someone of such low origin seemed not to understand the laws of the aristocracy, he would explain them personally. Interfering in a war without reason was not allowed in the Kingdom of Cairo. According to aristocratic law, a family needed to present a cause, receive confirmation from the central government, and only then officially declare a territorial war. Those processes did not exist because nobles were fools, but to protect the honor of both sides. Ignorance of the law was no excuse. Roman needed to understand how foolish his actions had been. Because of him, the Dmitri family could fall into disgrace. Unable to escape the criticism of the northeastern nobles because of the sin of an inept son, silence took over the room. After a few seconds, Roman asked if the Viscount had finished. Then he said he would explain his reasons. Lawrence and Dmitri had indeed planned to unite through marriage. Now, he was treated as an idiot with no value. However, he asked if they knew the true reason for the cancellation of the marriage. It was not because of reputation or rumors about women. As many claimed, in truth, he had been threatened by Barco's eldest son, Antony Barco. It all happened during a party organized by Barco. At the time, Roman was still close to Antony and attended the event because he was about to join the Lawrence family. There, he fell into a trap. When he realized it, he was in the same room as Emily Barco. Antony used that situation as an excuse to threaten him and force the cancellation of the marriage. It was a carefully prepared scheme to separate him from Flora. Upon hearing that, the nobles began whispering among themselves. Doubt started to fall upon the Barco family. Roman knew something he had learned in his past life. When a weakness is exposed and accepted, it ceases to be a weakness. Viscount Barco reacted with contempt and asked if he really thought anyone would believe that nonsense. He said everyone knew what kind of trash he was, and that trying to cover up the truth was disgusting. Roman replied that he had expected that kind of reaction, so he would present another reason for interfering in the war. He explained that Antony Barco had crossed all limits with Flora, who was his fiancée, and that because of that shock, she had decided to cancel the marriage. He asked if the Viscount would deny that as well. He said they could confirm it with Flora Lawrence whenever they wished. He knew Antony had used a lie to trap him, so it was only fair to respond with another strategic narrative. He declared that he had interfered in the war, using only his own strength, without officially involving the Dmitri family. That had been the only way he found to take revenge for her. He asked the Viscount and everyone present to reflect. He asked if that truly was not reason enough for his interference. With that, Roman dismantled the central accusation. He established a personal motive and left all the nobles with doubt in their minds. Viscount Barco realized that exposing the supposed lack of justification was now useless. He needed to buy time. He said he did not fully believe Roman's words, but that he would confirm them on another occasion. Then Roman went straight to the point. He said the Viscount had two options. He could end the matter right there by applying an appropriate punishment to Antony Barco for his personal actions, or he could escalate the situation and turn it into a direct conflict between the families. If he chose wrong, Roman would return home and reveal everything to his father. The Barco family knew they could not face the Dmitri. A direct war would mean annihilation. The Viscount declared that the issue between Roman and Antony was personal and did not justify involving the families. He said he would summon Antony to apologize on his knees, but Roman asked when he had ever requested that Antony kneel. In what world does the aggressor choose his own punishment? Later, the Viscount informed Antony that he would take part in a trial duel. Antony panicked and asked his father if he would really leave his life in another man's hands. He said Roman would not let him leave alive and begged him to refuse the proposal. The Viscount ordered him to compose himself. He said he was the eldest son of the Barco family and that when he became the successor, his life would be tied to the fate of the entire family. He told him to face reality and never forget that humiliation. At the very least, he should be prepared to lose an arm. He left his own own son kneeling on the ground, begging to be spared. When the day of the trial duel arrived, Antony, even in front of all the Barco nobles and his own father, trembled with fear. He tried to persuade Roman, saying that he truly liked Flora, and that perhaps he had lost his mind when he heard about the marriage. He apologized for everything, and said he meant him no harm. He said they were friends. When Roman drew his sword, Antony fell into despair. He begged him to spare his life just this once. He swore he would repay that debt for the rest of his life. The nobles were disgusted. The Viscount grew even more furious at his own son's cowardice. Roman asked what it meant to repay something for the rest of one's life. How exactly did he intend to do that? He asked if there was truly any way to compensate for the atrocities he had committed, or to erase what he had done. He said the Barco family was already ruined. Then he questioned why he should grant forgiveness to someone who had openly disrespected him, and tried to destroy him with such a vile scheme. When the Viscount realized what was about to happen, it was already too late. Without the slightest bit of mercy, Roman stepped forward and pierced Antony's stomach with his sword, directly and decisively. He acted like Baek Jong-hyuk, who once, even while in conflict with his own brothers, endured every assassination attempt in a single night, and still stabbed each one of them to death. There was a moment when the 12th son of the celestial demon pointed out Baek Jong-hyuk's flaw, saying that he had no commitment to anything, and that the moment he saw someone as an enemy, he would drive that person to destruction without giving the slightest chance. According to him, that was a critical flaw that could one day hinder him. Even so, Baek Jong-hyuk knew that this brother was not only powerful, but also tolerant enough to accept those who were defeated at his side. He replied that he understood what his brother meant, but that massacring anyone who showed even the slightest hostility toward his way of living was the reason he had survived at the bottom of the cult, and that was how he would continue to live, because death was the only way to eliminate all variables. It was with that same mindset that Roman almost split Antony Barco in half. His death was a result no one expected, least of all the Viscount, who was completely devastated. Roman asked if there was any problem, since a criminal dying in a trial by duel was something common. The Viscount, consumed by rage, demanded to know what he had done, and ordered them to kill the demon who dared to murder his son. Even so, the knights barely had the courage to approach Roman. The Viscount claimed that he had planned everything from the beginning, that he had not even brought a single guard to pretend he came to negotiate any agreement. Roman replied that he could not even stand breathing the same air as them, and that from the moment Antony threatened him, that outcome was natural, the consequences of his own actions. Then he declared to the nobles present that if there was still anyone who insisted on maintaining ties with the Barco family, they would have to face him as well. The Viscount asked if he thought he could escape that situation, but Roman said there was no need to flee. He made it clear that he would be watching the Barco family from then on, and would continue attacking until all of them fell. After that, he left as if nothing had happened, leaving the members of the Barco family certain that they had provoked someone they never should have provoked. A few days later, the Viscount Barco, unable to pay his debt to the Bank of Gold, tried to flee during the night, but was found dead on a nearby hill. The Barco family, which once had enough power to command the Northeast, met a tragic end. That same night, Hans found the young master returning covered in blood. Roman remarked that the moon was radiant, and that he had only gone out for a walk, asking if there was anything wrong with that. Later, while collecting his dirty clothes, Hans confessed that everyone had been worried. He said he could not be happier to see his lord being recognized, but that he kept putting himself in situations that were far too dangerous. He could not hide his anxiety, and asked him to take better care of himself. Roman replied that he had already said this before, reminding Hans that he was one of his men. He thought of Baek Jong-hyuk, who had massacred countless enemies to the point of forming an ocean of blood, yet had a single rule that allowed him to become the heavenly demon, to protect all those beneath him. To him, a single person under his wings was worth more than hundreds or thousands of enemies. Roman then told Hans that he would do his best to protect everyone under his leadership, and asked that he himself not put his life in danger, as that alone was enough. While all the commotion surrounding the Barco family was unfolding, the Melok family organized a social event. Helena Meloko, a lady of the family, noticed that even the noble women who had once supported the Barco side were attending in large numbers. Now that the situation had changed, Dmitri would become the central family of the Northeast, and that was the perfect opportunity for the Melok family, which had stood by the Dmitri family from the beginning. Among the guests was Liana Dmitri, Roman's mother and the wife of Baron Romero Dmitri. Liana used to interact with noble ladies to consolidate a support base for the Dmitri family. She had an impressive aptitude for political matters, something Baron Romero did not possess to the same extent. If Liana had not prepared the groundwork in advance, the Dmitri family, pressured by the influence of the Barco family, would have already collapsed. During the event, she thanked everyone for attending, and explained that the gathering was important so that the families living in the same region could understand each other better, especially now that they would need to move in the same direction. She acknowledged that not everyone had followed the same path until then, but that the situation had changed, and that it was necessary to establish a new central point. Even while maintaining a gentle smile, Liana had hidden intentions. In a subtle way, she poked at the wounds of those who had supported the Barco family, while at the same time showing generosity. She was skilled at that kind of game. Later during the event, Helena Melokwe asked Liana what she thought of Veronica. She commented that Roman, already 25 years old, needed to find a wife and start a family as soon as possible with the future in mind. She said she was not saying that just because she was the young woman's mother, but that she truly believed Veronica would be a good candidate. At that moment, another woman interrupted, asking if Veronica had not already made a marriage proposal to another family. Helena thought to herself herself that those vipers never missed a chance to provoke. Meanwhile, Liana simply ignored everything that was being said, calmly sipping her tea. Over the past 6 years, Roman had been seen as a nuisance within the aristocratic circle. The fact that he was the eldest son, and yet was not destined to lead the family, weighed heavily on her. However, his potential as a 4-star knight alone already pointed to a promising future. If he secured his place within the family, there would be no more desirable groom than him. It was at that moment that he stopped being a burden and became someone who attracted attention. Liana replied that she felt honored by the suggestion, but stated that Roman had already been hurt enough. She did not want a political agreement between two families. She wanted her son to find someone he truly loved. Because of that, she had no intention of continuing discussions about arranged marriages. With that, she made it clear to all the noble women present that whoever won Roman's heart first would be the chosen one. Meanwhile, Flora was once again in the library. Even though it was late at night, she knew that power was necessary to survive in that world. Realistically, the Lauren family would have lost the battle against the Barco family. She believed they might have had a chance if they had endured until winter, but she had faced a harsh reality. There were many variables, yet Roman had predicted all of them and acted boldly. She began to wonder how she could become someone like him. She blushed upon realizing her own thoughts and tried to deny it, telling herself that she hated him, that he was arrogant and egocentric. Even so, she could not stop thinking about how he had become so strong and what kind of person he truly was. She stepped outside to get some fresh air. She knew that despite her curiosity, she no longer had any connection with him since the engagement had been cancelled. There was no reason to meet him again. Suddenly, she was approached by her sister Sylvia. After hearing a few comments from her, Flora went to speak with her father. She asked what it meant that the Lauren family was organizing a party in Dimitri and why she had not been informed. The Baron explained that he had realized many things after the recent incident. He said that Flora had shown an impressive ability of judgment, resolving situations that he himself could not even imagine handling. Thanks to her bringing Roman Dimitri to the battlefield, they had been able to win. He stated that he would not make the mistake of underestimating her again, and that he would give his full support to whatever path she chose. He also assured her that he would no longer pressure her to make sacrifices for the family. From now on, she could follow her own dreams. Flora found the speech touching, but she wanted to go to the party. She asked why Sylvia had been invited and hinted that her father had another objective. The Baron admitted that it was out of personal greed. Flora understood that he was considering Sylvia as a possible bride for Roman. With that in mind, she decided that if it was to repay Roman, she would also attend the party alongside her sister. The Baron replied that she did not need to go if she did not want to, and that he had done everything so she would not have to see Roman's face again. Even so, Flora stated that she would accompany Sylvia and guide her. Meanwhile, in the capital of Cairo, at the Temple of Valhalla, one of the priests heard rumors that the son of a noble from a remote region, only 25 years old, had killed a 4-star Aura knight with a single strike. It seemed almost impossible, but if it was not just a rumor, it meant a monstrous prodigy had appeared. He decided to check it personally. His name was Willis, one of the priests responsible for rank evaluations in Valhalla. On the day of the promised party, scheduled for the late afternoon, the young ladies of the noble families arrived early at the Dimitri residence. They were all beautifully dressed, wearing shining jewelry and displaying flawless smiles. Sylvia commented that Dimitri was as boring as the rumors said. She said that all she could see were forges, coal, and metal everywhere, and that it was no wonder the place was called the Land of Blacksmiths. She questioned how people could have fun there, and implied that the Lord of Dimitri had no interest in art. Flora knew that Sylvia's father was the younger brother of the Viscount of Lawrence, who had settled in the capital as a merchant. Both Lawrence and Dimitri could be considered rural areas compared to the capital, so she understood her sister's behavior. At one point, Sylvia came across a line of workers leaving the mines, laughing among themselves. Some noble women commented that they were dirty, that miners should not be walking through the streets like that, and that this was the problem with Dimitri. Flora ignored the malicious remarks, and as she passed by one of the miners, she realized it was Roman. Soon after, Hans appeared in a panic, asking how the young master could do such a thing. He said he could not stop him from going to the mines, but at the very least, he did not need to come back looking like that. Roman was completely covered in soot and dust. Hans began cleaning his face and clothes with a handkerchief, complaining that the cloth was already completely black. Roman replied that it was enough, and asked Hans to stop cleaning him. When the young noblewomen realized that the dirty miner was in fact Roman Dimitri, their eyes shone like hunters before perfect prey. At last, the moment Sylvia had been waiting for had arrived. She thought he was even more impressive than the rumors suggested. She observed his body and concluded that it was magnificent. She knew that he would most likely become the heir of the family, but wondered why someone like him would be working in a mine. Perhaps it was a test for the successor. Perhaps his status had soared because of his recent actions in the war. Sylvia told the other noblewomen that it was time to introduce themselves. She approached him and asked if he was Roman Dimitri. She introduced herself as Sylvia Lawrence and expressed deep gratitude for his help during the war incident, commenting that he was very different from what the rumors said. Roman simply replied that yes, it was him. Then he asked Hans to follow him and simply turned his back, ending the conversation without giving it any importance. Seeing that, Flora could not help but laugh softly, thinking that he was still exactly the same. Later on the way, Hans commented that those young women were guests of the party and asked if he could not have been a bit more polite. Roman replied that he would have been, if it had been worth it. He said that they had ridiculed Dimitri's miners, and that alone was enough for them not to deserve any consideration. Hans then asked how long he intended to keep mining, since the Lord did not force him to do that, and even so he had been working in the mines for days in a row. Roman explained that Dimitri's roots lay in the forge, but that there was another reason behind his actions. He said that the ores extracted with blood and sweat by the workers were transformed into the beautiful and refined equipment of the family, and that this was the true essence of that place. He stated that understanding this through words alone was not enough. It was necessary to create a real connection. That was why he wanted to experience that work alongside them, and empathize with each of them. Upon hearing that, Hans thought that the young master had grown a lot. He was moved and swore that he would clean every trace of dirt from him with absolute perfection. Meanwhile, Chris was training the 30 soldiers of Roman Dimitri. They had gone through the war against the Barco family and still remained loyal. To those who followed him onto the battlefield, Roman taught the fundamental techniques of the heavenly demon cult, including sword techniques and azure cultivation. This knowledge was a true treasure, capable of unlocking their potential as aura swordsmen. As he analyzed them, Roman thought that they were finally equipped with basic power, but it was still not enough. He needed to create his own intelligence network, capable of investigating any target inside and out. The problem was that an information network required wealth and manpower, and he still did not have sufficient resources. He then called Chris and asked how the training was going. Chris replied that everyone was progressing very well, learning with dedication and speed, and that he was optimistic about the results. Roman said it was time to teach him a new sword technique, something he deserved for having started earlier than the others. Chris had already formed a solid world within his own understanding of combat, so it would not be easy for him to accept a new type of knowledge. Even so, Roman stated that he was now ready for something different. He decided to teach him the lightning technique. There was a time when the lightning sword ruled Muram, a secret art that belonged to a man once known as one of the 10 heavenly masters. Now that technique would be passed on to Chris.